Welcome to our first Bureau Advisory Committee meeting for 2018. As you, those of you who have been here before, you see there are some new faces around the dais, whatever you call this thing. So rather than me introducing, because I don't have bios for our new members, and of course because Michael needs to introduce himself as well, we do have a quorum. We can now proceed. So I figured the best way to start would be to have our two new members, Megumi and Hanya, each introduce themselves, and then we can have them go first, and then we can have Michael tell us a little bit about himself now that he has joined us, and then we can proceed to business from there. Megumi, you want to start?
Hi, this is Megumi Tsutsui. So, can you hear me?
A little closer. There you
go. So I'm filling the role of the consumer advocate position. So this is my first BPP meeting, and I'm very excited to be here.
Can you tell us where are you normally when you're not here?
Well, normally my day job is working as a staff attorney for an organization called Housing and Economic Rights Advocates, which is a legal services nonprofit.
Well, welcome. Hanya?
Hello, my name is Hanya Carbajal, and I am a former student, and this is my first meeting as well. And when I'm not here, I'm a legal assistant for a personal injury law firm in Los Angeles.
Welcome. All right, Chief.
All right. Well, welcome everybody. My name is Dr. Michael Marion. I'm the new Bureau Chief for Private Postsecondary Education, and it's certainly an honor and pleasure to be here and work for the great consumers of our state of California. A little about me. I'm originally from Portland, Oregon, born and raised family from Mississippi, from Gulfport and Tupelo. Does anybody know what Tupelo is famous for?
Honey.
And and Elvis Presley. And so it's certainly an honor to be here. As I said earlier, I've worked in education my entire professional career, private, K through 12. Most recently, I would transition from Drexel University, which was downtown on Capitol. And so I was the Associate Vice Provost for there for the last 3 years, also adjunct faculty for 5 years during my time there. And definitely look forward to working with everybody here. And definitely want to give just a quick update and thank you in regards to the Bureau. My team, or our team over at BPP, has been outstanding also in DCA and supporting me in the transition into this new role. Special kudos to Lisa Ferretti, our Deputy Bureau Chief, who's been outstanding in helping bring me up to speed on things, and also my other chiefs that are here with us as well. I want to thank you all publicly for helping me transition over the last 3.5 months into this new role. The ball has been moving really fast, and I've been learning a lot, but I look forward to certainly working with everybody and telling everybody some of the great things that we've been doing here with BPB in the last 3.5 months. So thank you so much.
Welcome to you and to our new members. Okay, so just one quick agenda item change to note, which we won't get to for a bit, but under agenda item number 6, we're going to move the Bureau fund condition, which is listed as E, up first so that our representative can get back to his day job. So welcome. We have established a quorum. The first thing that we will do is if there are any public comments for items that are not on the agenda, now would be your chance to come up and make your comments. You do not have to introduce yourself if you don't want to. Is there anyone in the room that has any comments? No? Going? Bueller? Okay. So then we will start with the review and approval of the advisory committee meeting minutes, which everyone should have gotten in their packets. Anyone have any corrections, notes, comments?
I have one comment. I really appreciate how detailed the notes are, the minutes are. I think they're very, very helpful for new people coming in, and for those of us who are here and may not remember everything, and it really keeps us on track as to what we've already talked about and what we need to follow up on and so on. So I really appreciate the detail. Thank you.
I had one note, and it was a typo. And I'm trying to remember where my copy is. Read, so I'd be able to find it. Under agenda item 1, it says Richie Bernard called rolled instead of called roll. Big picture items, people. These the things I notice. Okay, so can I have a motion to approve the minutes? David?
Second.
Thank you, Tamika. Do we need to vote on this, Richie? To approve the minutes? I think we do, right? Yeah. Okay. Okay. Does anyone have any public comment related to the minutes before we do a vote? All right. All in favor of approving the minutes? We'll start with you at your end, Tanya.
Yes,
Approve.
I approve.
Aye.
Yes.
Aye.
Aye.
Unanimous. Thank you, everyone. Next up on the agenda is item number 4. This is Bureau update or DCA update. Come on up, Chris.
Thank you. Number of firsts here today. First, let me introduce myself. I'm Chris Castrillo. I'm the Deputy Director for Board and Bureau Services here at the Department of Consumer Affairs. Just want to say welcome to our 2 new members here today. In addition to Bureau Chief Marion, it's my first opportunity to come and address your board and witness the proceedings. Very, very excited to be here. I've been at DCA now for a whopping 4 months. We have our Assistant Deputy Director, Karen Nelson, in the audience as well. She's been here for 3. We also have a new Assistant Deputy Director, Patrick Lee. Between the 3 of us, we represent a new and expanded Office of Board and Bureau Services here at the department. Really looking to engage with each of our boards, bureaus, programs, commission, to be responsive to not only our board members, but to our advisory committee members, our bureau chiefs, our executive officers, and staff across all departments to help kind of navigate the various departments and divisions within DCA and be as responsive as possible to each of our bureaus and programs. So we're really looking forward to working with you all. And again, I'm really excited for the opportunity to be here and speaking with you today. With that, just want to provide a couple of brief updates from the department. We recently had a director's quarterly meeting, and Mr. Marion was in attendance. We really appreciate you being there. These quarterly meetings with the director are an opportunity for our boards, bureaus, programs to have a direct line of communication with the director himself. At this meeting, a big portion of that was dedicated to unveiling some items in 2018 that the department will be working on with respect to its strategic plan. We are going to have 3 more quarterly meetings this year, and once we get those dates updated, we'll be sure to let the Bureau know, and we look forward to continuing that dialogue with our programs. Continuing on that line, we are also going to be having our Executive Brown Bag this month. That's going to be Wednesday, February 28th. This is in conjunction with Solid, and these structured social gatherings provide a forum for transferring knowledge, building trust, and establishing networking relationships. Really an opportunity for all the executive officers and bureau chiefs across all of our programs with DCA to get together, talk about common themes, items that we're working on, and an opportunity for some of our new executive officers, new bureau chiefs to get some knowledge from folks who've been around for quite some time. We think it's a really great program, and Mr. Marion certainly would encourage your participation in that. Also want to do a quick note on our department's future leadership development program. I believe Marino O'Connor, our new BPPE licensing chief, has been a participant in that program. As I'm coming into this office, we do a lot of great things in this department, and I think the Future Leadership Development Program certainly is one of them. For those of you who are not aware, this is an opportunity for staff at our various programs to learn from executives, executive mentoring. They are paired with a mentor. They work on projects together. And from the department's perspective, this is a really key piece in grooming our future leaders of the department. We think it's been a fantastic program. That cohort is set to graduate on March 7th, and I really look forward to working with Solid and our team over the department in establishing a new cohort for the following year. So please stay tuned for any updates on that. With that, just going to conclude my update, but again, just want to thank you all again for the opportunity to be here. Really looking forward to working with the Bureau as I settle into my new position here. If you all have any questions, whether that's for your advisory committee members, Mr. Marion, for your staff, please don't hesitate to contact my office, either myself or Karen. We'll help get the answers you needed in a really timely way. And again, really looking forward to working with you all. Thank you so much.
Before you go, I don't know if you had a chance to look at the minutes, but last meeting the director indicated I'd asked a question about the long-delayed new IT setup that's supposed to be coming into effect. At one point it was called Breeze. I'm not sure if that's still what's on tap. And it's been years. And I asked him for some specifics, including, some timeline.
Sure.
And he said that he would provide specifics on that issue at the next committee meeting. And I wondered if you have any of that information, or if that's something that you can send us. If you don't have it today, since you're new, you may not have that at hand. But if you can send that to us as soon as possible,
Yeah.
It's. I hate to hit you with it, but it's something that has been, I think, hobbling the Bureau for many years now.
Sure. No, I believe we have our chief for OIS here, Jason Piccioni, is going to talk a little bit about the business modernization process and should be able to speak to those items for you. Okay.
Thanks, Chris. Up next is agenda item number 5, a presentation by the Department of Consumer Affairs Office of Information Services. Welcome.
Good morning. Good morning, Committee Chair Carey, committee members, and Bureau Chief Marion. My name is Jason Piccioni, and I'm the Chief Information Officer for your Bureau for Private Postsecondary, as well as the Department of Consumer Affairs. I'll be providing an update this morning on exactly the question that was asked. Business modernization is the tag and the label for our initiative. I have some prepared thoughts to talk about, and then I'll be able to answer any questions that you might have. Business modernization is the initiative to address the gaps and efficiencies in modern business processes for the boards and bureaus that were not implemented on the Breeze platform, essentially answering the question, BPPE was not implemented on Breeze, so where do we go from here? But first, a bit of history to set context. 2008 to 2011 were the years for the early Breeze project planning and approvals. 2012 through October 13 was the development implementation of Breeze Release 1, including 10 boards and bureaus, which had its very well documented set of challenges. 2014 to 16 included an update of plans and strategies for the initiative and the ultimate development, training, and implementation of Breeze Release 2, which included another 8 boards and bureaus. But by late 2014, the 18 remaining boards and bureaus, including yours, was de-scoped from the Breeze project. That project would end after the implementation of Release 2. Your bureau was then left without a clear roadmap to overcome technological deficiencies, like replacing the well-founded yet outdated sales system and the need for data analytics. Stakeholders immediately asked what we plan to do with the de-scoped Release 3 boards and bureaus. We replied that we would focus on landing Release 2 successfully with all of the lessons learned from the first release. And we did that in January 2016. Release 2 was widely acknowledged as much more successful than the first release. In 2017, we sat down to answer the question of how the department addresses the boards and bureaus in Release 3 successfully. We have since drafted the Business Modernization Plan and individual business modernization reports. The plan is a single document for the department that sets out lessons learned, guiding principles, and guardrails for each program's initiative. The reports are a collaborative, fundamental document that address each program individually and provide a living document to react and reflect the program itself. I'd like to talk about 3 hallmarks of the plan and report. First, as the title indicates, It's a business modernization plan. It's not referenced as a technological modernization plan, which is very key, is very critical, because what we're doing is looking at the business of the Bureau and all of the nooks and crannies therein to appropriately reflect that in an ultimate technological platform. Second, the initiation and progression of all activities are based on you, the individual program, the Bureau for Private Postsecondary, and its overall organizational readiness. What I mean by that is we start, we progress, and we move forward at the pace that is appropriate for your targets, your target timelines, and your target outcomes. Third, the effort is solely based on the needs of the Bureau for Private Postsecondary, not an aggregate or composite of perceived departmental needs. Again, very focused on the Bureau itself. The last thing I'd like to speak about are the three major verticals that are included in this effort. The first, and these are both linear and chronological. So the first is dependent, the second is dependent on the first, and so forth. The first is business activities, which your Bureau has started, and I'll talk about some progress metrics that we have so far in just a second. But business activities includes documenting all business processes in an as-is and could-be scenario and developing a business needs specification. That flows into the second area, which is the project approval lifecycle, or the PAL process, which is a California Department of Technology required IT project approval process, thus aptly named, I guess. And lastly, we get into the heart of it, which is system implementation. After we have documented business, chosen an appropriate, viable, cost-effective platform, and then we move into system implementation. I have some metrics as far as the business activities, which I said that your program has begun in earnest, and kudos to both leadership and staff for allocating resources and participating very well in this the business activities process. We have facilitated 18 meetings with an aggregate of 99 staff in those meetings over the course of the last 5-6 months, and we've created and documented 95% of your business processes in an as-is scenario, and we've just started, and we're at about 20 for your could-be scenarios. And the importance of the could-be scenarios is it opens up the landscape to your staff of what, well, could be. We look at technological platforms that we do not currently use to see what the market can bear, what is out there, what are the new technological bells and whistles that could possibly assist your Bureau and its business processes. I have some time estimated and proposed timelines. I have to imagine that that's going to be a question, so I could talk about that, and then I'd get into any questions that you might have. As a part of the initial report, and again, the plan, business modernization plan, is a single document for the entire department, lays out the guiding principles and such. The report, business modernization report, is specific to the Bureau. It talks specifically what we've done. It's a living document that will grow as we continue to do business activities and the like. The initial publication or publication of the report has proposed timelines. I'll just repeat that for effect. Proposed timelines. We have a lot of confidence in the timelines for the business activities because we've already started it. And again, your leadership and your staff have been extremely engaged with our solid staff, and it's being led by Robert Bales on your side, and doing a very, very good job working to get those business maps complete. The business activities is set to conclude in second quarter 2018, And just before that, we will start, which we already have done, actually a little ahead of schedule, drafting the Stage 1 business analysis. That is the first step into the PAL process, which I spoke about earlier. So we're a little ahead of schedule on that. Stage 1 has to be submitted to the Department of Technology in order to get that project approval rolling. So we plan on submitting that in April. That's according to the schedule, but we believe we can do that in the March timeframe. From there, it gets a little bit proposed. It gets a little bit more towards proposed. We have external dependencies and the like. But right now, the proposal, the timeline shows starting system implementation, which is after the PAL process, in July 2019, with a minimum viable product go live of, I'm sorry, it's really small, July 2nd, 2020. Minimum viable product is a strategy that can be employed, but doesn't necessarily have to be, which identifies a fundamental baseline of functionality that is implemented in a release 1, in a first go MVP go live. Then your release 2 go live, if that strategy is employed, is scheduled for July 5th, 21. That's the proposed timeline on the table currently, and I'm open to any questions.
I have a question. So you said that with great emphasis, which I appreciate, that this is proposed and there's some external factors once you start getting to, July 2019, July 2020, July 2021. What are some of those outside factors that might be pushing against that timeline?
The external factors and dependencies are the PAL process that we have to go through Department of Technology. If we create, if they love our documents and they come through and that back and forth is quick, then we get to the end quicker. We get to system implementation quicker. Some of the other dependencies are platform choice. If the platform choices that will be included in the PAL process are the Breeze platform, as well as the Acela platform, which is another licensing platform that the department has currently in its portfolio, as well as any other platform that your bureau deems appropriate to include in that analysis. If your bureau were to choose a program that the department is not familiar with, that would create a longer timeline. I'm sure there are a few other dependencies that I'm not thinking about right now, but those two are the largest ones that come to my mind.
Change of scope would also delay things.
Change of scope could delay things.
As the business needs change
Yes.
over the next 3.5 years, which
Yes.
there's high odds that.
Yes, definitely. We're trying to keep the timeline as compact as we can so that that doesn't happen. But inevitably, a regulation comes and we have to react to that. The scope is definitely.
You say it's called business modernization, which I understand you saying means it's not just the technological aspect. What else is it?
It's really focused on business and business processes and process improvement. I give an illustration of that. We haven't really discussed an ounce of technology at this point through the 18 meetings and the business process mapping. What we've done is we've inventoried all of your business processes, original application, your Strif business processes, your annual report processes, etc. And we've put those on paper. We've put squares and triangles and diamonds on paper so that we know exactly what to feed into the next step. And though I won't speak for your staff, I believe that has had healthy benefits to date in just identifying business and looking at process improvement that can take place without a technological aid, like a new system. If I'm incorrect, I apologize, but I believe, yeah. So that the initiative itself is reaping healthy benefits outside of a technological environment right now.
You said it has to go through the PAL process. Who exactly? You said it has to go through that process, and then whether they approve it depends how long it will take. Who actually is doing that?
The California Department of Technology.
Which is part of, is that a separate independent agency then from DCA?
A separate department from, yes, Department of Consumer Affairs.
And what are their what are their timelines? Are they backlogged? Does it take a long time to get through there? Are they pretty much up to snuff as far as processing things quickly? Or
the process, so the PAL process is a new process, and by new, I believe it's been around for 2.5 years. Just to give you some context, we just went through the cannabis initiative, the California Cannabis Initiative, everybody probably has read about. That initiative went through the PAL process, and it was the fourth project to go from beginning to end. So that's how new it is. And right now, I can't recall the timelines for that process, but it's built into the proposed timeline, and PAL right now is estimated to go between January 18 to July 19. And again, I could get into a little detail of the PAL process. It's a 4-stage process. It's an iterative process between the first to the fourth stage to continue to look at the viability and of the project itself, the cost benefit of the project itself, and if we're still at the same place as Committee Member Vice suggested, where we are now to where we will be in July 2020, whatever it was.
I assume that any system will have built-in capacity, for example, to add fields. So, for example, if you have 20 complaint categories, and then the legislature adds a new responsibility, I assume that everything will be built so that there is some flexibility to add additional ways to document things. Would that be correct?
Yeah, I would say that in general that's correct. A hallmark of the newer, we'll call them platforms, because the technological applications are really driving more towards a platform. And what I mean by that is, here's a fundamental base to start from, configure how your business works. It kind of seems to be a direction that the market is going in. But I will diverge a little from your question and say this, because it's really important in our Breeze experience as well as others. When you get into the PAL process and looking at viable options, there are applications out there that are COTS products or commercial off the shelf. And Breeze is a COTS product, as well as the Acela platform, which has recently been implemented for the cannabis initiative. A COTS product is a product not unlike Microsoft Word, where you are purchasing a product that works in such a way. You can configure, and you could add complaint categories and so forth. But there is a fundamental function of how a COTS product works. And I put that in juxtaposition to a completely customized product that we build from scratch. Where we do it, we have complete ownership of the code and can make it act within reason any way we like.
Going to your earlier statements regarding historical context, the BPPE was excluded from Breeze 1.0 and 2.0, and then descoped following the launch of 2.0. And so the existing data system structure has been in place since prior to 2006, when you mentioned that process beginning.
I wrote it in 1999.
Got it. So 1999. And the earliest, is it correct then to understand that the earliest the BPPE staff will be logging into and using in any form a new system would be the potential go live of July 20 of a bare bones or basic functions?
Yes, July 2020, yes.
And so through the rest of the reports that we received today, what we have is what we're going to have for the next 2+ years.
Correct. And I will say, in affecting the timeline, either we talked about extending the timeline, though I don't necessarily see it in this case, but a positive effect on the timeline could occur. It's about resources.
Mm-hmm.
But I will say, in this particular case, your leadership and staff are very much engaged and committed to this initiative, and so I'm fairly certain that yes, the answer is your staff will be logging in at the earliest July 2020.
And another couple of questions. I didn't catch a couple of things you said. You said that you're pretty much 90% done going through the as-is scenarios. And what percentage did you say it was that you are on the could-be scenarios?
16.
16%. And when you say a matter of resources, is that primarily resources, Bureau resources, or resources from outside the Bureau that would be a limitation?
Both would be. Your staff, again, very much engaged and committed at all levels. And we do, Department of Consumer Affairs does provide facilitation and business process assistance resources from our solid group, which you've probably experienced through from a training perspective. So our solid group does training and so forth, and has we've evolved an organizational change management arm of that group, which is assisting your staff. So yes, those are the resources.
And I think you said there were, I don't remember the number of agencies you said that did not get included in phase 1 or phase 2 was, what was it? 18. And I'm assuming all these 18 agencies are trying to do the same process at the same time as the Bureau.
Correct, but not at the same time.
Okay.
We have worked just like we've worked with your program, and we've there are resource limitations, obviously, but we have collaborated with every one of the programs to come up with a schedule when to start business activities, which then is the initiation of all the rest of the.
So how fast this is done will not depend on whether someone thinks that some other agency should get priority. It will depend solely on how far the agency is along in doing its own processes in stage 1 and so on. Is that correct?
That's absolutely correct. And again, the hallmarks that we talked about, this is a Bureau for Private Postsecondary Education initiative. And though I'm not going to not tell you the truth and tell you that resources aren't a limiting factor, just like they are anywhere, the speed as to which a program goes, continues through this initiative is almost completely dependent on itself. And if this is priority number 1, then we go at priority number 1 speed, and so forth.
And you said you'll have a minimum viable product alive in 2020. And then you said 2021 is what do you, a point do you reach in 2021?
If a minimum viable product is, strategy is employed, and it takes some discussion to figure out if that is feasible for this program, then we will, the proposed timeline shoots that at July 2020. Then July 2021 of the next year is we take the remainder of the functions on top of the minimum viable product. And if you want a quick illustration, we do original applications and amendment type applications and enforcement as a minimum viable product. But we then add annual reports and Strif in that next year cycle, or sometime through that year cycle, as just an example.
So that then by July 2022, the proposal is that it would all be up and running at that point. Is that right?
After that July 21, the product goes into maintenance. So at that point, the project is over, and it's a platform that we maintain, just like we do many other products. We modify as it needs modification. You were talking about adding complaint categories and so forth. so that we have it in maintenance after that.
We're talking about basically 3 years.
Okay.
Is there anything as far as resources that we could recommend be added for the Bureau that would help speed the process up?
I'm going to defer that question. As I mentioned earlier, Robert Bales and maybe other folks that I don't know is leading the charge from the Bureau staff side, and I know that we are ahead in the schedule. We're on time in the schedule. We're ahead in one part of the schedule. So at this point, unless you wanted the entire timeline moved up, I think we're on schedule, on target.
And if you were to try to move the timeline up, do you get into a problem of, even though you had the resources, you're actually doing things too fast, so that it adds error to the process, or not?
I think that that's definitely a consideration, given I think a do, rinse, and repeat is sometimes very beneficial to fleshing out what you need in the end. And we also do have that external dependency of the PAL process. So even if we threw everybody at it today, we still have those dependencies. So I think the timeline we're on seems reasonable and is being well resourced at this point.
To that point, could you would characterize the BPPE staff engagement as high and responsive in the as-is and could-be business planning process that you've been in so far?
Whatever words that are better than that, yes, very, very much so. The program has been, it's not an initiative that anybody is pushing. It's an initiative that your leadership and your staff are driving at this point.
Thank you.
I really appreciate the detail, and I hope that you will continue to keep us informed if things happen that the proposed timeline isn't going to be the actual timeline, and if so, why, and that kind of thing. Thank you very much.
And let me jump in briefly and just give credit to Robert Bales, who's been leading this initiative with our team and has been doing a great job and really pushing forward. I think I found Jason's office within 72 hours of me starting at the Bureau. I showed up on his doorstep with questions about our IT system, and he's assured me and has been very transparent with the process. I also want to definitely say, it was something that Jason didn't bring up, is that we're actually going through the process of changing our website. And actually should be launched this month. And so that was something that I pressed upon Jason fairly soon when I first got to the Bureau. The process is going really smooth, and I think we have a launch date for the new website of late, maybe next week, I think it is. And it's going well. It looks amazing. Obviously, coming from an institution of higher education, working with many students, it kind of has that look and that focus to be really student and institutional friendly. And so I definitely want to give OIS and Jason credit for being able to turn that around fast for us. And as we all know, ideally the 3 years is not where we want to be, but at the end of the day, we are taking baby steps to be able to hopefully make this process go a little bit smoother, hopefully with this new website launching next week. So thank you, Jason, and thank you to my team at BPPE.
Thank you, Robert Bales. And thank you for your presentation.
Any public comment?
Beat me to it. Public comment about IT. My girl chomping at the bit for that one. Okay, I think that moves us to agenda item 6. I think we're going to start with Bureau Fund Collection. There we go. All right. So we're going to do E first, and then we'll go from there into what is on the agenda as A. Welcome. Yes, please.
Good morning. My name is Matt Nishimini, and I'm with the DCA Budget Office. It's a pleasure to be here in front of the Advisory Committee again. I last reported at your May 2017 meeting. First, I'd like to extend a warm welcome to the newly appointed Bureau Chief, Dr. Michael Marion, as well as all the new committee members. We look forward to working with all of you in the future. I'm here this morning to provide an update on the Bureau's fund condition statement and specifically the Bureau's fees. As I've previously reported, SB 1192, which was chaptered in 2016, adjusted the Bureau's fees, adjusted the Bureau's annual institution fee beginning January 1, 2017 to be set at 0.45 of 1% of the total gross revenue derived from an institution's branch and main locations, with a minimum fee of $2,500 per location and a maximum fee of $60,000 per location. Additionally, the maximum any single institution can pay would be $750,000 in any given year. Under the provisions of SB 1192, the fee rate of 0.45 will increase to 0.55 of 1% beginning July 1, 2018. At the May Advisory Committee, I reported that revenues were materializing as we had projected, and that institutions appeared to be complying with the new fee structure. However, I cautioned that because the fee had only been implemented for a few months, only 4 months, we could not make any conclusive projections regarding full-year revenues at that time. I'm here today to report that things are much different, as we now have a full year of actual revenue data. And using this data, I've updated the fund condition statement, which we can discuss, and I've provided here. First, I want to make sure everyone understands what we're looking at and how to read this fund condition statement. As a reminder, so this is the administration, the Bureau's administration fund condition statement. We read this top to bottom and left to right. On the left side, at the top, there's a description and a title. On the left side, there's a bunch of words, beginning balance, revenue and transfers, expenditures. We'll go into all the types of fee revenues, and we'll discuss that in greater detail. Moving downward, it ends up with a fund balance and then months in reserve. Months in reserves is how many months it would take the Bureau to burn through its cash balance. Then I have some notes in the bottom here in the bottom left. On the right side, we have a bunch of numbers and columns. Columns represent each year, so beginning with 2016-17. Those are actual revenue and expenditure numbers. Moving to the right, we have CY, which is current year, BY is budget year, and so on and so forth. Very similar to what was produced and published in the 2018-19 governor's budget, with two modifications. As the title suggests or indicates, this has been updated with current year, so 17-18, revenues and expenditures. Also extended the fund balance horizon out to BY plus 3. Typically, the fund condition statement is published in the governor's budget has 3 years. But we've provided this extended horizon so that the advisory committee can see the future potential costs that the Bureau may incur. How to read this? So starting at the top, as I indicated, this is from the governor's budget with updated revenue and expenditure projections. FM6, what does that mean? That's from December, so through December. So if you recall, the fee went into effect January 1, 2017. So now we have a full year of data. Okay, now let's go down the revenue section. I'm going to take this section by section. Start with the beginning balance, then we move into the revenues. So these are the inflows. The top 4 revenue items are the main ones we're going to talk about. So delinquent fees, renewal fees, and that includes the annual institution fee, other regulatory fees. These are cite and fine, administrative fines, and then other regulatory licenses and permits. These are initial license fees. The other fees down below are much smaller in revenue, and miscellaneous services. Some are actually going to go away. There's one interest income for the interfund loan, which was repaid in 16-17. The Bureau received $55,000 for that. There are no more outstanding general fund loans, so you're not going to see any of that. So the bottom ones are very minor. We're going to concentrate on the top. Okay, in the 16-17 column, Bureau actually brought in $11,991,000. We had projected that the Bureau would bring in $11,920,000. So it's actually an increase of $71,000, or about 0.5%. So we were pretty close. For 17-18, the current year column, we had projected revenues of 14,737,000, and now we're at 14,813,000. So that too is an increase of about 76,000 higher, but about 0.5%. So we're very confident in our revenue estimates. And because our revenue estimates have been substantiated by actual revenue data, we're pretty confident about the BY projection, which includes, again, the increase effective July 1, 2018. I'd also like to note that for this model, in BY and Onward, we've left revenues relatively flat, especially in the top 4. And that's because we just don't know the projection at this time. And so we would like to see the 18-19 actual revenue data come in before making any incremental adjustments to those line items. And that's footnote 1 down below, static revenue growth. Questions?
More time. The fee that we're looking at the 16-17 actual is what percentage of revenues for an institution?
I'm sorry, I don't really understand the question.
The fee increase hits July of this year, right? July of 18?
Correct.
What's the old percentage, the new percentage? Can you remind me what those percentages are
right,
again?
0.45 of 1%, and it will go up to 0.55.
Roughly 20%. Okay, and that's your renewal fees are up roughly 20%. Got it. I had to get it straight in my head. Thanks.
Your current year, 17-18, you have actuals through December, or what?
That's correct.
Okay, thank you.
So did 2 questions. Did the remainder of this past year, calendar year 2017, did it, 2 things. 1, did we have any issues collecting? Because I know that we had talked about that at the last meeting about some delinquencies with the new fee. Were we able to get everyone caught up? Do we still have people who are outstanding? Because it looks like we are pretty close to what we expected. But was there any challenges with collecting?
I would have to defer to the Bureau for that response.
All right, I can ask that. And one more question. I see in BY plus 3, the balance is substantially less than the previous years. What accounts for going from a prior year adjusted balance of 7 million down to 4.9? Seems like a pretty big drop.
So once we drop into the expenditure sections, which I'll go over next, that should become.
All right, gotcha.
Is the increase from current year to budget years, looking at renewal fees, for example, from 13 million to 15, one of the drivers obviously is the July 18 increase. Are there any other drivers? That's it. Thank you.
Okay, can we move on to expenditures? So in 2016-17, as we note, the Bureau spent $12,427,000. The Bureau also had other expenditures. There's $19,000 for the fiscal system. This is the new statewide budgeting, accounting, and procurement system. And then the Bureau also paid $981,000 in statewide pro rata. So this goes to the governor's office, all the central services, Department of Finance, State Controller's office. So these are costs that are just going to get assessed directly to the fund. Current year, we're projecting that the Bureau, as of FM6, we're projecting the Bureau will spend $13,707,000. And the Bureau must contribute $20,000 to the fiscal system and over $1 million statewide pro rata. Moving to the budget year, 18-19, this is showing the proposed budget, $15,760,000. We're showing the Bureau fully expended here because it's the budget year and we just don't know at what rate the Bureau will spend its money. There also is assessment for the fiscal system. And then there's a new one, $175,000. This is a supplemental pension payment. It's for an unfunded liability that got into the budget. Then also, the Bureau will be spending $964,000 again in statewide pro rata.
Why did the expense go up by $2 million from that year to year? And I'm rounding.
In the current year and the budget year?
Yes.
Right. So the current year, the $13,787,000 represents what we think the Bureau is going to spend in the current year. The actual appropriation was higher, but we think that the Bureau is only going to spend this $13.7 million. The $15.76 million is what is budgeted for the Bureau. So that's their full appropriation. So we're showing them fully expended because we're not.
And the gap between, I'm sorry.
Okay.
So the gap between budget and actual spending, are those unfilled positions, or I don't know if you could speak to that, if that would be a question for Michael.
I would defer to the Bureau on their savings. Yeah.
Yes, because currently now we're vacant almost 22 positions, if I remember. So that's going to be one of those reasons for next year. I'm hoping that we'll be able to get back fully staffed. So,
just to dovetail on his comments, so in the prior year, 16-17, and in the current year, the Bureau is projected to save some money, and over 90% of it is based on personal services, and that goes to the vacancies.
Will in other staff reports today, will we be seeing a breakdown of those vacancies by position?
yes.
Thank you.
Okay, moving forward, in BY plus 2 and BY plus 3, if you look down right below where I have the department's budget, I have something, Information Technology Systems Update. And so this was what the previous speaker was. And we've put in a placeholder here. While it's still premature, as the previous speaker indicated, to submit a formal BCP requesting the dollars, we're putting in a placeholder of somewhere between $6 and $8 million. And we've spread this over 2 years. So that's what the $2 million is and the $4 million is. And so to respond to your question, that's what's going to be driving this to insolvency. And which is why we wanted to provide this extended horizon so you could get an idea of the future costs that are going to be.
How do you handle cost accounting for those IT services? Obviously, they're not all spent in 2020 and 21. That's implementation, but they're actually, those resources are being spent now as they develop.
So there are, so these resources, as we have budgeted here or estimated, the 6 million, the 2 and the 4, so they're not in the Bureau's budget. We would have to submit a formal BCP and request those dollars up and beyond what the Bureau's currently appropriated.
Again, just to be clear, they have scheduled for implementation in July of 20 and July of 21, and so there's going to be a launched product at that point, so the costs for development would have been incurred, but they're not recognized in the Bureau budget until, so your accounting system isn't going to charge the Bureau for that until after it's delivered, the product?
Again, this is just a placeholder. If they needed cost in the 1920 budget year, we could look at doing a formal BCP. Again, it's a timing thing. There has to be a formal package, a complete package submitted. If it were small costs, the Bureau has been saving money, could likely find some savings and revert those resources to development side. But this is, we're talking about the actual product here.
Understood. And what is the source of the $6 to $8 million estimate?
So we looked at similar budget change proposals that are going that have been approved in the past couple years. It's really a $5 to $10 million range. We chose in this example $6 to $8 million just to show you. Only 6 of that is represented here, so this could be on the low end. The IT experts will need to chime in and provide it.
And Matt, do you recall what Cannabis just spent on their IT system? I know we met with them and was able to talk a little bit about it, but I think it was in the range to 8 to 10 million for their IT system.
No, I'm unfamiliar with the project,
Okay.
so I have to get back to you.
No worries.
On the revenue side, are you factoring in any type of growth for additional campus locations or branches, or headquarter locations, or a shrinkage?
Right. So actually, no. So this fund condition statement. So I have two more comments about this. First would be that this does not include any new legislative mandates that may be applied. So the legislature says the bureau needs to be doing X, Y, and Z, and there are costs associated with that. Well, that's not included here. Likewise, it doesn't include any contraction or any reaction from industry, maybe closing campuses. If you recall, the annual institution fee is based on the number of locations and the revenue that is derived at that location. So to the extent a location is closed, that revenue will go away. And I would defer to the Bureau on all the complicated machinations that could occur in the future.
Does anybody have any additional questions for our budget expert? No? Thank you. Public comment, anyone? I was going to say hello and use your name, but if you would like to not be identified, I'll let you identify yourself.
I am not that attorney. My name is Robert Johnson. I'm the Executive Director of the California Association of Private Postsecondary Schools. Appreciate the information today. On a quick glance, I'm assuming that on the BY budget year extensions, you are not including the legislative mandated fee increase in 2018. So that's money coming in. So hard to tell what your revenues are actually going to be like based on any projection 18 forward. So you have to probably revisit these numbers at some point.
Absolutely.
Yeah. Okay. So David's point is something that we brought up last time this lovely subject came up. And the reality is, as if I was doing charts, I have a big chart up in front of me. And one line would show the Bureau's numbers of staff and revenues going up in a pretty 45% moving exponentially from around 60 positions historically to what, over 100 now? Okay, so well over 100 positions. And then I would show under the other graph the other line I would show would be the number of institutions paying fees. And at the top of that number, I would show in 2003 to 4, around 3,000 institutions, and it would show a straight line decrease passing that other line headed for the bottom with a basically resulting figure. And hopefully you can help us with your new website, because the last time I looked, your directory of institutions was fatally flawed in terms of the numbers of schools that were closed that were still on there. So I would show in my chart that we're down to about 1,000 or less, all institutions, and I think substantially probably under 1,000. So on one hand, you're moving $9 million up on your expenditures through 2021-22, and at the same time, the industry is moving down dramatically in terms of numbers and consequentially in terms of the fees paid to the Bureau. So, being the unhappy frog in the room while the water is getting hotter, I am suggesting that at some point, the Bureau needs to take a very hard look at the number of staff, particularly with the increased pension payments, your operational costs, all your information data costs that are coming online and accelerating heavily as well, as to the number of staff appropriate for the mission that you're doing. I will not recount the long discussions we had over the staffing of the Bureau and that staffing report that came out that even, at least in side conversations, everybody admitted that that study was rather inaccurate. Nobody believed on one side that it takes 12 minutes to open an envelope, and everybody believed on the other side it did not take a year to do an application. So there is a substantial question as to what is the real task of the Bureau's numbers and whether or not what makes for an effective organization. And I would suggest that given the very basic realities that your fees apparently are moving up by $9 million in the next 4 or 5 years, and that our revenues from our sector are going down dramatically and keep going down, that the remedy is not to keep increasing fees on disappearing schools, because essentially the fee increases essentially exacerbate the decline of the school numbers. In fact, we hear anecdotally that there are many schools that can't make their financial ratios because of the state annual operating fees. When somebody suggests that it's only $750,000 a year to operate for what, 12-month license as being somewhat a normal cost of business, I would assure you, I don't know any other state agencies that charge that. I would appreciate knowing anybody for a 12-month license to pay $750,000. And the reality is many of our members are paying $300,000 and $400,000 a year in annual license fees. Now, I would say that basically the consequences of that are not only essentially they leave, your revenues go down. The other part about that is ultimately students have to share in those costs. Tuition fees reflect those kinds of operating expenses, particularly at that level. Very hard to absorb that under the line when you're basically looking at how you spread these costs. So it's not just an institutional, essentially, gripe or complaint. It's also stepping back. Everybody acknowledges that there's a regulatory need, and we all understand the state legislature sometimes has done nobody's service by introducing a number of things that are replicative and duplicative and confusing and contradictory. I mean, that's just kind of what legislation does on occasion. But I would say this, and this is something under the Bureau's control. You have gone on a regulatory writing binge for the last 5 to 6 years that I think is relatively unusual. Understanding that you started in 2010 with a blank slate, you carried over the old degree granting regs from the prior acts, which I thought was a huge mistake, but it was expedient and the Bureau did it. So from there, you basically built kind of this empire of regulation building, which is under your control. So the reality of it is if you're looking for an area to increase efficiencies, reduce costs, streamline the administration, decrease timelines, if you have less requirements in your operational books in terms of what an application needs to be approved, you could not sit there and listen to people complain about taking 3 years to get an approval, right? So, and I know that was the discussion, and that was the intentions that the prior Bureau chief had, but the reality of it is that what happened with the state auditor coming in and jumping all over the Bureau and basically chasing them around the block 3 or 4 times and trying to resolve those issues in front of the legislature and other folks, that intent disappeared. So, as the canary in the coal mine would like to say on occasion, these numbers basically are probably accurate. The question is, do you have enough schools to justify keeping 100 plus staff on board? And of those 100 plus staff, are they appropriately appropriated to the right functions? And basically, are there things that you can do to increase efficiencies? I'll end the lecture there at this point. But the reality of it is if we're looking down the road at the future, folks, it's not good. And I think for us to pretend that somehow this money is just going to flow in and be there for state utilization, I'm not sure that's a valid assumption. And I think that somewhere in the discussion, we have to kind of wrestle with that. Thank you.
That's a good question. Excuse me, Robert. Sorry, I want to ask you a question, if I may. I'm curious about what regulation, if any, there are that you've seen that weren't mandated by legislation. Because I've been sitting here since sort of the beginning of this, and it seems like we haven't done any regulations that weren't required by the legislature to do. But if you have some examples where, it's something that wasn't mandated, maybe you can just send me an email or something. I don't care.
And there are. I think the former director basically, I think, had an intention to rewrite the regs. I think she wanted to increase them, but I think there was an argument at that point to decrease them as well. So that was kind of a dialogue that was starting to continue that died on the vine, so to speak. But, regulations can't restate the legislation. So every time you look at a reg, you have to understand it's not restating anything in the statutes. Statutes stand alone. So regulations are essentially the Bureau's explanation of how they intend to carry out the statutes. And within that, there's a ton of discretion. And the Bureau chose to add a lot more requirements. And in fact, added requirements, frankly, without going through the regulatory process often, via staff directions, increased letters to schools asking for additional data and reporting elements. That's a common occurrence. So you've got the statute, you've got the regulations carrying out the statute, you've got operational manuals, which are purely in-house, and then you have staff directives to schools ordering additional information and other kinds of reporting requirements that are not contained in the regs or in the statutes. So what I'm suggesting is not just a pure reg rewrite. I'm suggesting that you take a look at the overall way that basically information flows to the Bureau through volumes of information and how that gets disseminated and whether that's actually used, whether it complies with statute, and whether or not there's a way to reform that so that everybody's life is simpler, not just schools, but also for the staff.
Yeah, if you have some specific examples, if you just shoot me an email, that'd be great.
If you read some of our correspondence over the year, Margaret, I think you'll find a number of CAB statements that were extensive in that area. I think Ms. Carey actually helped on a few of those as well.
Probably.
So, thank you. Thanks.
Thank you, Robert. Everyone be okay with a 5-minute bio break? Okay, please. All right, we'll be back at 10:45. Ready to roll. All right, everyone is back. We are going to reconvene. Up next on the agenda, we have a report out from the Enforcement and Compliance divisions. Beth and Yvette are both at the table. And take it away, It looks like Enforcement's up first, Yvette. Take it away.
Good morning, Yvette Johnson, Enforcement Chief, Complaint Investigations and Discipline. So over the 2017 year, we received 764 complaints, and we closed 607 of those complaints that we have received over the years. And some of the benefits of those complaints some of the benefits to the students is that we actually obtained $107,937 in refunds in tuition and fees off of those complaints. We were also able to get classes that students were able to take at no additional charge. Students were able to graduate by relooking at their units that they were supposedly have taken and doing a recalculation, and students were actually able to graduate. We were able to obtain student records and transcripts and proof of training documents, so students were eligible to take examinations. And we've had students that were able to actually complete the programs. And we've had hours credited to students' accounts. Some of the process improvements that we've been making over the years have been, we've revised the template for the investigative report to make it more streamlined so that it's the staff, when they're writing their reports, they actually know where information should go, so it makes it very structured so that you don't have to look all over the report to try to find the information you're looking for. We've implemented a peer review with our staff. So when they're writing their investigative reports, they'll have one of their peers review the report to see if they can come up with suggestions for them or other avenues to look at. And so by the time it gets to the manager's desk, it should be a comprehensive report, which we're finding to be very helpful. We've also narrowed down the scope of the complaint. In the past, when we received a complaint from a student, we would not just look at the issue that was the student's issue, we would look at the institution in its entirety. And with that, it did cause a longer amount of time for an investigation to take place. So now we're at the point where we are actually looking at and trying to resolve the student's issue. We're finding that there are further issues, we're referring that for investigation, where we can take a more comprehensive look at the institution. And it may be us sending a referral over to compliance so that they, during a compliance inspection, they know what issues to look at. So as opposed to everything falling on the desk of the investigator to find out, we're sharing the wealth with the other units as well. And we're also looking at working with the AG's office again to do additional training for staff as far as investigative techniques and report writing. One of the items Mr. Holt asked about was staffing. With our investigations unit, over the year we have had a vacancy rate of an average of about 10 vacancies per the unit. And with that, we've had 5 associate governmental program analysts, 3 staff services analysts, a staff services manager, as well as our office technician. And it seems like as soon as we get someone in, someone leaves. So we've been trading back and forth. I can happily say that we have currently filled 2 of the field investigators, the associate governmental program analyst positions, and they are scheduled to start in March. We're actively recruiting for the staff services manager position, as well as the office technician and the staff services analyst.
I bet you said you had 10 vacancies out of how many positions?
Out of 21.
So you were like at half staff?
Half staff.
More
yes.
ways than one. Okay, thank you.
We've also been collaborating, as I said earlier, with other units within the Bureau. So we've been working with our quality of education unit as well. So when we're dealing with complaints that are in regard to the quality of the education or the health, we're relying more on the quality of education unit to help us review those complaints. We've also been collaborating with other boards and bureaus within the Department of Consumer Affairs when it comes to our complaints, especially when we have dual licensure issues and just program issues that we're looking at. I've provided you with a copy of with our statistics for the year. And I don't know if you've had a chance to look at them, but do you have any questions?
I do have a question. The decline in complaints closed year over year, would you attribute that to a lack of staff? And if not, what other drivers were there?
It's a lack of staff. We've had, over the past 6 months, we've had a lack of, we've lost 2 managers in that time, where we've replaced one, but we still have 1 vacancy that we're trying to fill, as well as our staff coming and going. And so we deal with, when we're doing that, we have the training when we bring new staff on. It's taking our managers away to do the training, as well as, so they're not able to review the cases as quickly.
And the age of, referring to the table that shows the age complaints pending as of 12/31, there's still an alarming number with greater than, more than 12 months age, so more than half of your outstanding cases are more than a year old, with 300 of them more than 2 years old. In previous meetings, we had talked about, or you had mentioned prioritizing those and trying to work through backlog and balancing that with, current demand. Has there been any developments in regards to, you described, for example, some innovative ways that you're trying to improve staff performance? Is there any developments you could give us regarding working through the backlog of cases?
Yes, we've actually, with our transition of managers, we've actually utilized some of the other chiefs in the units, and they've been assisting us in reviewing those cases. So I have to thank all of my chiefs for that, as well as we have lead analysts that are reviewing some of the subordinate staff's work. So that's helping to get those through quicker. We've also implemented more case reviews, as well as we've been breaking it down where we're looking at our internal complaints versus our external complaints. So when I went through the list, I found that 57% of our older cases are actually internally generated. So they're not from external sources of unique complaints coming from students. They're issues that we found within the Bureau that we've been looking at.
And that's different than the proportion for all complaints. So they're disproportionately internal, the aged cases are. And are any of those against or involving closed schools? For example, the 300 that are 2+ years, do you know are any of those for closed schools?
We're actually going through our list of closed schools now and making sure that none of the complaints that we currently have open are involved with that.
As I understand it, all of the folks that handle the complaints are based here in Sacramento. And I'm wondering, with the new director, if you folks might want to consider, I think in the past someone has mentioned that one problem with keeping people in those positions, partly I know the pay is not terrific for those positions. If one, and in the past I think people have said that part of the problem is people having to travel so much, and a lot of people don't want that much travel. And I wonder if you might consider whether it would make sense, and I think also in relation to the number of schools or the number of students, if you had a branch office to handle complaints and inspections or something in Los Angeles, for example, or at least in Southern California somewhere, because while that would have its own expenses, it would certainly cut down on travel expenses, and it might make it, you have a larger pool of potential employees to draw on in that area, because I'm concerned about the persistent vacancy, because we look at this and the students, we have a certain backlog in applications for schools, but the backlog for student complaints is far higher, and even if it's an internally generated complaint, that means there's a problem there that ought to be dealt with sooner rather than later, because it may indicate something systemic that needs to be looked at more. So I just make that as a suggestion for you folks, and you may have your thoughts about whether that would or wouldn't work, but I would certainly suggest something like that.
I'd also like to thank the staff and the Complaint Investigations Unit for all the hard work that they do, because they are very hardworking people that are trying to get through what they can with the resources that they have. So I really do appreciate their.
I could also commend you on the reaching out to other offices for assistance, and most specifically for training for staff and professional development is another way that I would encourage you to address vacancies and turnover, even is by investing in those employees through training.
I forgot, I had one other thing, and that is, I think I mentioned this before, but in the complaints that are outstanding, I'm assuming there's a certain portion of those that are outstanding because they've been referred to another agency, or do you close them as a complaint when they get referred to another agency?
That would depend on whether or not, if the only allegations were for another agency, then those would be closed out. But sometimes we have complaints that are with more than one agency that may deal with violations of our law as well.
Right. So, for example, you might refer it to the Attorney General's office or something like that, and continue actually working with them in their investigation, I presume. It probably would be helpful, unless it's an insignificant number, to note in your outstanding complaints what percentage are referred to another agency, so that you can't close the complaint because you're still in effect dealing with it, but it's not your delay, it's waiting, and sometimes those investigations can take years. That might be helpful to know which ones are that way. And also, I know you have an assigned section of the Attorney General's office that works with this particular agency, but I noticed the Consumer Law section of the Attorney General's office seems to be very active in bringing lawsuits, business practice lawsuits against some of the schools. Obviously, Corinthian was one, and I think there's some others. And I'm just wondering if you have a liaison with that section of the Attorney General's office as well with regard to your complaints. Again, that's something that you may want to take a look at as a new director. I know when I worked there, we had a very close relationship with a number of the agencies, including the the prior agency that oversaw these schools. So that often when we were investigating, we would reach out to this agency, or as we would get complaints, or other agencies, other licensing agencies, as well as legal aid groups and other Department of Consumer Affairs groups, both local and state, to see what they had. And sometimes there's a provision in some of those lawsuits to pay investigative fees to the agency if the agency brings them information and helps in the investigation and so on. So that might be something to look into.
We'll point out, when you add fees to the schools, the students pay for this. So let's not try to hit the schools too hard with things unless they really
Well,
need to
I'm
get
talking
hit.
about when you've got an investigation for consumer fraud or the like, and so you're prosecuting a school for its misconduct, and you have a successful
They're
settlement.
probably going out the door. They're closing anyway at that point, is
Sometimes.
my guess.
Yeah, sometimes they have money you can capture.
The number, first, I love all the presentation. Very, very good. It looks like we've got about 17% less complaints last year than the year before. Is it because the schools are getting that much better, or is it because there's just less schools? What do you think it might be?
I would love to take all that credit.
That's what I was going to say. I was going to attribute it to the work that the Bureau's doing and getting the word out there about us.
Well, a lot of the internal complaints went down. I think it's because the schools learned what the Bureau was looking for in a little bit better ways. I mean, I can remember, an internal complaint could have been the wrong font size on a disclosure. You fixed it, and now you're in compliance, closed. So,
But I think with our workshops, for both to the licensees as well as the schools that are currently licensed, the ones that are trying to get their approval, as well as those that are currently, that's helped a lot with the complaints.
you have a feel for how many unapproved institutions, or am I saying it the right way? Schools that are operating that shouldn't be without approval. There's still quite a few of them out there.
We're still working on that. We actually have an analyst that's assigned to go out and investigate just by looking through the internet, phone books, or whatever sources are out there to try to find these schools.
For at least one person.
Or at least one person.
The other 10 people, put them on.
It's just one person trying to find a phone book. It's a full-time job. Thanks, Yvette. Any questions for Yvette? Should we do public comment? Oh, I'm sorry. Go ahead.
Sorry, just going back to your comment about how a lot of the backlog is from internal complaints. What is it about the internal that they've just taken a lot longer to close?
Well, first, we always try to focus on the consumer first, so we want to make sure that we're working on this externally generated complaints and handling their issues. And with the internal complaints, it could be that the school may have an application on file with us, or someone else could be working with them already. So it's more of trying to get the school into compliance through that route, especially if we know someone's already working with them.
After both, yeah. Any other questions for Yvette? Thank you, Yvette. If you can stay, we'll have Beth do hers, and then we can have public comment if you can stay to address questions. So, thanks, Beth. Go ahead.
Good morning. My name is Beth Scott. I'm the enforcement chief, and I'm going to be providing some information today on the compliance unit, which includes the annual report unit. And to further what Yvette is saying, the compliance unit has taken a very proactive educational approach to some of these issues. So I have Marcus Dawson, the manager of annual reports, here today, and I want to thank him for some innovative ideas that he has assisted me with and came up with. So what we are doing is we are going to be piloting a conference call that will be available to all schools. It'll be monthly right now, and it's being provided at no cost to the BPPE. So I want to thank DCA for assisting with this. At that conference call, schools will be able to call in, and there will be a representative from licensing, enforcement, and compliance to answer any type of questions, along with an agenda item of maybe an issue that we're seeing that we can cover with the schools. So we're going to be providing that, and if it's useful to the schools and we see a huge interest, we will increase the number of times we're able to offer that conference call during the month. So the first call will happen in March. So I'll be bringing some more information on how that works out to further meetings. We also, in our workshops, are taking a very proactive approach to making sure that when we offer a workshop, we strategically looked at attendance last year at our workshops and chose some areas, looking at where schools are and where we have the highest attendance to make it ease of the schools to do the workshops. If we don't have full participation, then our staff will begin calling or emailing schools that are in the area to let them know that there is an opportunity to come attend our workshops. We do the school performance fact sheet and compliance on the same day, which seems to be really beneficial to the schools, so they only have to come one day. So we make sure that they understand if you come to the compliance in the morning, you can stay after that afternoon. We've also developed on our sign-up sheet for the workshops, we have put on there, do you have any questions that you would like answered in advance? Because what we find is some of the schools attend the workshops for specific questions on their institution. So not to take away the time from the workshops, but we're able to look at those questions in advance and maybe refer that to licensing and say, this school has a licensing question, so we can get them an answer quicker before the workshop, and then when they come to the workshop, they can focus on what we have going on there. So that seems to be working out. We're getting a lot of questions in advance that the school seems to be holding for the workshop. So now we're able to proactively, offer that individualized attention to them. So that's working out really well. The enforcement unit now, the compliance unit is now focusing on increasing the number of inspections. We worked through backlogs that we had, got all of the inspectors on, a platform to begin increasing the inspections. As of December of this year, we had 1,040 main institutions. So, looking at what we need to be doing in that area, we currently have 9 inspectors actively working. One is on a leave, a 10th one. We have 2 vacancies in inspector positions that we have already interviewed. We're just waiting for approvals. One of them left the state, and the other promoted to a manager in another department. So positive issues, they left there, and we hope to get those filled. We have 1 vacant NTC analyst, which handles NTCs. That vacancy is due to the fact that we promoted our NTC analyst to an inspector.
What's an NTC?
The notice to comply analyst, they deal with the NTCs at the schools. We have 1 vacancy in annual report unit. That's an SSA level that we have not filled due to salary savings. So that's all the vacancies we have in compliance. We are also piloting in the compliance section for the inspectors the use of tablets, a Surface Pro type tablet, which minimizes the amount of carry that they have to take to the institutions, and it limits any technical difficulties, makes it easier. So we're piloting that with a couple inspectors, and it seems to be working out very well for the transfer of information when they get there, and it seems to be working. So we're hoping we're able to do that. And it's furthering our intent to automate. We have been participating in the mapping that we talked about, and I participated in all the maps for my units, and like was said earlier, it has allowed me to see processes since it was as is, and be able to ask the question, why are we doing that? Do we need to be doing that? Since it's as is and I'm there, I'm able to ask and be new, it's kind of a fresh set of why are we? So we have been able to streamline a lot of issues that will make the inspections move quicker and just more efficiency. We've also in the compliance unit created a tracking system that tracks the inspections from absolute start to finish, every step of the way. So from the time an inspector gets an inspection to the time that it is scheduled for inspection, to the time the inspection happens, to the time the report is written, to the time. So that has helped us with our productivity and keeping the caseloads on track, and it's a good tool for the manager. So we've done that. We've also taken a proactive approach in the annual report unit, where we have very innovative ideas coming out of that unit. We have gave the analysts in that unit caseloads of schools that they're responsible for and instead of just everyone works the same work. That way they're able to get to know the schools, offer some more individualized outreach, be very proactive in getting the education out there. So they have somebody particular that they can call, and the analysts can reach out to their own caseload of schools. So that is working out really well. That is all the information that I have. Are there any questions on anything that I've reported? My attachment is 6B that goes along with my presentation, if you have any questions on that.
Really quick, you said 1,041 schools.
1,040 mains as of December, yes.
Mains. Got through 85 last year. It's kind of every 12 years, that's the pace we're on now. What do you project for next year?
Well, the way it is if on average, right, if we were fully staffed and fully trained right now, inspectors do an average of about maybe 2 inspections a month. If we were fully staffed and fully trained and they were able to do 3 a month, we could hit our mandate. So we are staffed, in my opinion, to be able to meet that. Last month we had the highest number of inspections that we had in a 14-month period. So we are trending up, which is good. And part of that is the hard work of the inspectors, training, consistency, a proactive approach to working with the schools prior to announced inspection, things like that. So, I'm confident that we will be able to increase that number, and the comprehensive work that the annual report unit is doing. We cannot miss the fact that that is public protection also, because we're painting a broader brush and reaching more schools by all of the work that we're doing, and the outreach. That number does seem low, but the last year we had to really slow down on the actual inspections due to staffing and due to backlogs that. I didn't want to just do more inspections without, the reports moving out, the NTCs getting processed. It was overwhelming to staff.
On the unannounced, accrediting body I work with, we do unannounced visits as well, and we found that by giving a 24-hour notice, the effectiveness of the unannounced, because the people that need to be there, to get the documents, especially with travel, just being able to maximize the efficiencies of these unannounced. There's not much a school can do in 24 hours, but other than make sure the person that needs to be there to meet with the inspector is there with the information that they need to see. Would that be helpful to go from a 100% unannounced to a short notice period?
Well, we have, in our regulation, we do announced and unannounced. And, typically the schools will have the first will be announced. They will know, so they will get to know, and if we go sooner, the next one is unannounced. And we do have the requirement that the schools have somebody there during business hours that can handle these issues. And we haven't had that many instances that we get there and there's just nobody to assist us. The schools, for the most part, are very willing to assist and help. So unannounced is just that. It's unannounced.
I think statutorily it is too. And just from my experience, if the school is a really rotten school, in 24 hours they will tell certain people to stay home who might otherwise talk to the inspector. There are reasons to do it unannounced rather than, part of what you want to do when you're there is talk to students. The other thing I'd say is I really appreciate the point you're making about numbers is something that we're trying to catch up on. But we can't lose sight of the fact the reason for all of these inspections and handling complaints is really to try to weed out schools that are harming students, harming the public, harming the industry by giving the industry a bad name. And so, and I don't know, and that's something I think is for a future topic, I don't know, it still feels as if the agency is behind the curve in identifying those schools compared to, say, the Attorney General's office or sometimes even the Department of Education. And I think one of the things that we probably need to focus on is, what is there something that we could be doing differently, that we need to change, that so that we are really hitting those schools that are going to be the problem schools early on. I can't identify anything from, the reports I think are very helpful. The only thing I guess is, again, you've got a vacancy issue, which you think you're going to be able to fill, okay?
Yes, ma'am.
Okay, good.
Yes, and we do understand, thank you for those comments. We do inspect on a prioritization. So we have 19 points of, schools of a prioritization that, looking at certain factors that may make a school at a higher risk. And, of course, internal information coming towards us that we need to inspect.
Thank you both. Appreciate it.
I think you're onto something there. Your point with the prioritization. On the announced visit versus the unannounced, are you looking at the exact same things? Or is the unannounced a little narrower in scope?
No, we're looking at basically the same information, but we do have access to look at information in anticipation of going to the schools. If the schools are doing what they need to be doing, we are provided with information, and we have access, from the websites and things like that. So we're doing some preliminary work, and of course we are meeting with the inspectors now before they go out to be proactive to say, this school may be having some financial issues for the HCM1 or HCM2, so we're going to take a closer look at the resources of the school, the materials, the equipment. So we may have a more focused, type of inspection, but the inspection process is looking at all of the areas.
Okay.
Just a quick comment that the inspections, both announced and unannounced, also have leverage beyond the visits that you're able to do. Large institutions particularly, there's a best practices of doing internal unannounced inspections using the same criteria. So there particularly large, well-run schools do this even independent. And so as a point of leverage, the enforcement activities reach even further than you might know. So.
Yes, sir.
Sorry, can you describe what would constitute getting a notice to comply as opposed to a referral for enforcement?
A notice to comply is what that we find that is a minor violation that the school has that they are unable to fix prior to the inspector leaving that day. It's the material violations do not go on a notice to comply. So if it's an announced inspection, we request documentation in advance from the schools. We will look at their catalogs, we will look at their enrollment agreements, we will look at their website and give them a deficiency notice in anticipation of our arrival saying, these are the things that are out of compliance. A vast majority of the schools are able to fix that prior to our arrival or upon our arrival. And if they can fix everything that is deficient, they won't get a notice to comply. Now, if the inspector finds material violations, then the school is notified that we identified some material violations that we cannot put on an NTC, and it will come back for a possible referral to the enforcement unit. At times the school is notified that we found material violations, and they're rectifying those items also. Once we leave.
Just to confirm, of your 85 compliance inspections, that 47 is 55% result in notice to comply?
Say that, I'm sorry.
The 85 inspections, 55%, that 47?
Yeah.
And real quick, does anybody else have any comments before I say my piece? Go ahead.
Just one real quick in regards to that. A single visit can result in multiple notices to comply, I assume?
No, they will get one notice to comply with multiple issues on that notice to comply, yes. And we did, they are on the website, the notice to comply after the appeal period, and we did, with feedback from this committee here and the schools, now, as of July, if you have an inspection and you clear that notice to comply, our website will still say we visited and you received a notice to comply, but there'll be a notation that was cleared up. So the schools don't have to wait for the next inspection to get the word out there that, yeah, we had these minor issues, but we rectified them.
So real quick, I had the pleasure of going on my first inspection, and it was very eye-opening. The thoroughness of the compliance team, they did an outstanding job, and definitely want to give them kudos. I do have an unannounced coming up, but I can't announce it. And so beware, right? Also, real quick, and I didn't say this in the beginning, I just want to also thank David Weiss for allowing me to stop by his campus as well and meet with some of his students and see kind of his shop, and just know that I'm open. I know I met some gentlemen from San Diego. As I travel the state, I'm very much open to visiting your campuses. Obviously, I won't have the time to stay there all day, but definitely to check in. I want you to let you know that I'm just not a bureau chief inside the dais, but also I'm willing to go out and really see some of the institutions as well. So thank you.
Very much.
Thank you. Does anybody else have any questions up here? Is there any public comment from our audience regarding the enforcement or compliance units? Hello, Robert. You need both of the representatives to stay to answer questions, or are you just going to comment?
I can stand. I've done that before. I think you can hear me, right? I would think that we need a deeper dive on how the internally referred complaints get handled, and by what. First off, nobody ever, Robert Johnson, caps, nobody ever calls me when they have a great compliance review. So let's just establish that up front. I'm sure there are many that occur, and so everybody's very happy with that. I get calls when things aren't great. And one of the things on the internal, especially since the internally generated complaints are increasing and are outpacing essentially student-generated complaints, which was, when we all started this thing, the complaint process was for students to basically complain about a school. And I think that process works well. I think if the school agrees to agree or agrees to disagree, there's an appeal route. You can go to hearing, you can get that resolved. I think that's really clear cut. Where the confusion comes in is what I call inter-silo squabbling. And let's just say a hypo. School gets a stipulation from their approval analyst about doing certain things in a certain way. It's part of their license approval. School implements that process. Compliance person shows up, says, wait a minute, you're doing something here that I don't like. I interpret that as kind of a minor violation. And the school says, wait a minute, I got this because it was required to get my license. So what's the problem? Well, the compliance person says, in my interpretation, I think that's not right. So that becomes confusing. Then an internal complaint might get generated. And let's throw in a third silo, the fabulous educational quality unit, which is capable of generating its own findings of noncompliance against both the application process and the compliance process. So in the worst case scenario, and I've seen this happen a couple times, it's not a ton, but you ultimately have different findings from 3 different units inside the Bureau about the same issue or related issues with a school. You have a perspective from the educational quality unit, you have a perspective from the compliance unit, and you have a perspective from the approval unit. So I don't know how often that occurs, and I'd like to see some data on that if we could. It would be good to see if there's a way to kind of fix that. And the reality is, we've had this discussion before on this. As we, by the way, we had a discussion on the risk analysis. The Bureau made a pretty big pitch a long time ago that they were basically doing risk analysis to figure out what schools are going to present the greatest risk. I don't know what happened to that. Maybe it's still around. But what it would be nice to have, and we pointed out, was a single point of contact inside the Bureau that could essentially summon the 3 different units to say, what is the problem with this issue and who gets to win, in terms of, is this a legitimate complaint, and this is the basis that we're going to go back to the school on. The conversations I have with schools is they get lost in that. They're trying to figure out who to respond to. It basically bounces around and ultimately doesn't get recited for a while. So Understand that everybody has a job to do, but sometimes different opinions and perspectives kind of show up. And so it shouldn't be incumbent upon the school to resolve that, because frankly, they don't do a really great job of that. They get kind of dug in on what they think they should be doing, and they kind of defend that perspective. And then you have state actors that come in and basically try to say separate things. So again, it's understandable why that happens, not a great result. Would be nice to see a internal mechanism developed within the Bureau to kind of get people out of their silos a little bit, to kind of talk those problems through, and then make a rapid decision. Because I think, honestly, a lot of the delays in the complaint process, and particularly my sense, now I don't know this for sure, but on the internal generated, is that nobody knows who to respond to and how to respond and what the response will be via internal discussions as well. So that drags out over time. Again, student complaints, pretty clear cut. Student doesn't like this, school says, well, we gave them the right thing. It is kind of you make your decision and go with that. But I think, and especially as the number of internally generated complaints seem to be dramatically increasing, the potential for that is going to dramatically increase. And I do think that it's incumbent upon good administration to basically make sure that's not a problem going down the road.
Robert?
Noted.
Well, I think one of the points that Robert is making, I think, kind of applies across the board. And Beth, what you were saying about the annual report unit each having their own schools that they're responsible for. That there is a and I know that this is obviously a resource issue, but the applicability of that idea on a larger scale, where because to Robert's point, and having obviously I deal with schools who are going through the application process or responding to complaints, whatever the issue is, and they are dealing with different people at the Bureau depending on what it is, right? So I have seen that confusion where they're like, well, I thought I addressed this, and now it's with the EQE or EQU or whatever, the Education Quality Unit, and they're asking me the same thing, and I'm not sure if what I said before was accepted, and so having as a long-term project, if there's a way to have sort of a staffers assigned to certain schools so that the school has a point of contact that can help them kind of decipher when they have sort of things coming at them from different departments, different units. I do think that would be really helpful, because I know for some schools they don't know who they're supposed to talk to, or they don't know what the right sort of chain of command is, or if they're getting conflicting information, who do they ask, that kind of thing. So I always just tell them to call Lisa.
Attending the workshops goes a long way.
Yeah, the workshops are huge help.
Inviting people in, and they get to see you as people, you get to see them as people. I think it goes a long way. Quick question on the complaint process. It is part of the instructions that you ask the student, did you try to work this out with the institution before you brought it to us? That is part of it, right?
That is actually on the complaint form as well, that asks that question. Did you try to resolve this complaint?
Yeah, and Kate and Robert, your points are definitely duly noted. One of the things that I've been doing in the short time that I've been there is really trying to break down those silos, having a lot of open conversations about specific things in regards to this topic. So definitely know that those conversations are going on, and we're definitely having more collaborative conversations. So.
Great.
Quick question regarding the ratio of internal versus external. What confidence do you have in your tracking of that designation in your in the statistics that you reported?
Past year, very confident.
High confidence.
Mm-hmm.
And so that, as a percentage, declined from about 25% in 16 to about 18% in 17.
Yes.
Do you attribute that decline in internal complaints to the understaffing or some other process?
Actually, it is, when looking at the internal complaints as well, we look to see if we have a complaint that's generated by a student. And if we have an internal complaint that's dealing with that same issue, then we'll deal with it on that student complaint as well.
Got it. So it's subsumed then by the external complaint.
Right.
Got it.
I'm sorry, I forgot to mention this earlier. I think in the past we had asked, and maybe the next meeting, to get some sense of what kind of complaints they are that are not substantiated, or that are non-jurisdictional referrals, what kind of complaints are fraud, other. And I think I'd asked in the past if we couldn't have a sampling of complaints, a random sample of those that fit in those categories, so we could get a better sense of how complaints are being handled and have a better sense of what the others are. I think that I realize you don't want to be giving probably copies of complaints. I don't know what the issues are as far as, particular school to people who are representing particular schools or something like that. But I think that we're supposed to be able to receive any kind of documents that a board could receive under the statute. And so I think boards generally would be seeing those complaints. And you can certainly redact if you would want, personal information. But I think it would be helpful to get a random sample of, fraud, other, or contractual quality of education, and in the other grouping, the unsubstantiated or non-jurisdictional referrals, so we can get a better sense of that.
So, Margaret, boards actually wouldn't see the actual complaints, so we wouldn't be able to show you the complaints, but they absolutely can do summaries of the categories that are based on actual complaints. So you wouldn't see the actual complaint, but you would have the information that you're looking for.
I'm sorry, you say we cannot see the actual complaint?
Can't see the actual complaint. The boards do not see actual complaints because they actually are part of the investigative process, and the board ends up...
Even if the board makes the ultimate decision, or they don't get to it until it's appealed, is what you're saying?
Right, they're like the jury. They're like the decision maker, so they don't want to... They can't be involved in the investigative
until it's
process.
Brought to their level.
Right. But
since we're not a decision maker, there wouldn't be that issue.
But you wouldn't. We wouldn't want to disclose the actual complaints because of the Public Records Act, and if they're disclosed to the public and the advisory committee board, that committee, then they'd be open to being disclosed.
Even redacted, all that personal
think
information.
so, but I think if
but
you're
you
just
can give us
looking for
summaries, is what you're saying.
specific examples of what those categories include, there's no problem with that.
Or could you give us summaries of a complaint?
Yes.
You can summarize, do a random sampling of X number of complaints, and then give us summaries of each of those complaints.
Yes, we can do that.
If we picked a month, just like April, every complaint we get in April, this is what it looks like. Probably be about 60 complaints. Here's the 60. This is the
How we
synopsis of
categorize
what it looks like. And if there's any interesting ones, we'd certainly like to learn more. But
right, either that way, or you can use a random number table to just complaints each have a number. Just select them by choose your random numbers and then identify.
as long as it's current, if we go with this year, that'd be good.
Right.
Some current.
Right. Good point. Thank you.
Any other public comments on this section? All right, thank you very much. Next up, I lost my agenda. Licensing, thank you both. Marina is our new licensing chief, so we'll get to have her introduce herself. And Robert Bales is handing the mantle off. Thank you both. Marina, since you're new, can you introduce yourself and give a quick bio so everyone knows who you are?
Absolutely. First, I just wanted to say it's a pleasure meeting all of you. I've met some of you already before the meeting, and I'm looking forward to working with you in the future. So my name is Marino Connor. I'm the new licensing chief. I've been with the department for almost 9 years. In various capacities. I've worked on the department side. Most recently, I came from the budget office. And I've worked for other boards and committees at the department as well. So that's just a real quick bio of my DCA experience. But DCA was the first state agency I worked for, and the only one I've worked for. And I've really enjoyed it, and I love working for DCA. And so far in my first month and a half at the Bureau, I've learned so much, and I know I still have a lot to learn, but I've really enjoyed working with the team that's at the Bureau, and I have really high hopes for the direction we're going in. So, welcome. since I've already introduced myself, Robert was actually, I think he was going to introduce me, but if I ever get...
Sorry, I stole your thunder, Robert.
If I get off base, I'm sure he'll rein me back in or correct anything I say. Just to start off, to recognize, obviously coming into this position, one of the biggest issues in licensing is our current backlog. And that's one of the main things we are focusing right now is, how to eliminate that backlog. And we're really approaching it from the perspective that there's not just one solution. We need to be looking at it from all angles, trying different things. So that's kind of been the approach we've been going with. And building on the progress we've already made. And that's one thing I'll get to when I speak about the chart, is that we have made some progress. So some of the things we're looking at right now, and things that have actually already started, I'm coming in the middle of, is a complete review of all the procedures. There's some updating we need to do, but also refining and clarifying. Because anytime we can clarify our processes and make sure we're all being consistent, it makes our jobs much easier. And part of that is identifying if there's any room for efficiencies. Where can we create those efficiencies so we can cut down on those processing times? And as some of my cohorts had mentioned earlier, is we're really working with other units too. We want to make sure we're not duplicating processes that are already going on perhaps in other units at the Bureau. So coordinating with them and making sure we're not duplicating efforts if we don't need to. One other thing we're trying to focus on is our timeframes, of course. Making sure we're sticking to our timeframes and that the timeframes make sense and they're reasonable, and really holding all of us accountable to those timeframes. We've also looked at the letters that go out to applicants and licensees, because we have to make sure that that information is clear to the applicant or licensee, because anything that might be misconstrued or misunderstood, that's just going to add to the processing time. That's going to add to the back and forth. So as long as we can, make those letters, make sure they're clear, make sure, that the recipient will understand it, that's only going to help us in the end. So we've already looked at a few of our letters and some areas we can clarify and improve on those. One thing we are also looking at is our outreach to potential applicants. So right now, as I'm sure you know, we conduct monthly licensing workshops throughout California. So we're looking to build on that. We just started talking about this, but potentially adding some type of web tutorial that walks an applicant through each section of the application, because we can reach a much wider audience that way. We can put it on our website. It can be accessible to anyone anytime to really get, without it being in person, that hands-on experience. Because what we found is that when an applicant has attended a workshop, that application is more likely to be complete. There's less back and forth, there's less deficiencies, and that really speeds up the process as well. So those are just a few of the things I wanted to highlight that we're focusing on the licensing unit. But I did want to, of course, talk about the chart in your meeting packets. So this chart shows us the licensing application status as of Jan 1, 2018 for the 17-18 fiscal year. The first thing I want to point out is just a minor correction. The footnotes at the bottom of the chart, the A, B, and C, B and C should actually be reversed. I don't know if anyone caught that, but so B should actually be C and C should actually be. So I apologize for that little error there. So just to go over this chart a little bit, when you're looking at the left side, the left column, those are all our different application types we process. When you see full approval and full renewal, those are our non-accredited institutions. So the new full approval would be a new approval for a non-accredited institution, and the renewal full would be a renewal for a non-accredited institution. The changes, where it says changes full, changes accreditation, those are our substantive change requests we get for both, again, full being the non-accredited and then also the accredited schools. And exemption, those are verification of exemption requests we receive. And then at the very bottom are out-of-state registration applications. And now looking at the top row, all the column headings, Just I'm not going to go over all of them, but just to point out a couple. That pending assignment I've labeled is labeled as the queue. So those are all the applications that have not yet been assigned to an analyst. So those are all waiting assignment. And then the under review right next to it, those are the ones that have been assigned to an analyst, and that analyst is actively working on. So I just want to point out one other highlight on the chart is in the last 4 months, the total pending applications has decreased by 20%. And that is mainly attributable to the decrease in the non-accredited full applications. The full approval applications, those have declined quite a bit in the last 4 months. So like I said before, we are making progress, but we're looking at, speeding up that pace a little bit and continuing that trend. Those were mainly the things I wanted to point out. So if anyone has any questions on any of it.
Quick question on program approvals. You've got that as well. Change of programs or new
right,
programs.
Yeah, that would be part of the changes, the column, the rows for the changes there. That would be included in there.
Give me an idea. If an accredited institution wanted to get a new program approved, what's a typical time frame for that? It's a simple form, as I recall.
I wouldn't be able to say offhand what the typical time frame is. I don't know if Robert has a better idea. Those typically go to.
Did you say accredited or non-accredited?
Accredited.
Yeah, accredited schools, the process is a little bit quicker. So typically we will look at those within 30 days and get them out probably within the same amount of time.
Okay, 30 days. Perfect.
This is just a question about, just to compare things. When I look at this chart and I compare it to the age of complaints charts, it looks to me like students with complaints are having, there's some students with complaints that are having to wait a lot longer to have their complaint dealt with than there are schools waiting to get an application done. But it's not entirely clear because they're done differently. One is, 1 to 2 years, 2 to 3, over 3 years, and your chart is average days to approve. Here you do have like the oldest app and so forth. I just wonder for future comparison's sake if it might be useful for the licensing and the complaint folks to look together to see if they could have similar type analysis. Because when I look at it, and I may be wrong because it's not entirely the same, it looks like we need more emphasis on handling complaints in order to get that up to at least the same time frame as schools waiting to get licensed. But I'm not entirely sure about that. And I understand that part of the problem is just getting those slots filled with people. So, but it is a concern. I think there was 50 some were internal, the older ones, 50 some were internal complaints, but still that's a lot of students whose complaints aren't handled in a timely fashion. And for them, it may mean, rent money or whatever. So that's just a suggestion for the future to try to see if you can, either way looks good and is helpful, but just it'd be nice to be able to compare them a little better.
Absolutely. Any other questions for the licensing team? Any public comment?
The only thing that I would say real quick, Kate, is I want to give Robert kudos again because he's been actually doing dual roles for the last year and a half, I think.
Yes.
And I know he is very happy to have Marina here.
So now you get to run the IT project. So,
right.
You're always going to have 2 jobs.
And so definitely want to thank you publicly again for the work that you've done and welcome, Marina. And I'm happy, and I know our team is happy to have you on board. Thanks.
Welcome.
Thank you.
Thank you both. One more Bureau Operations update with the Office of Student Assistance and Relief. I did ask, yeah. Welcome.
Morning, Chair and Dr. Marion and committee members. Scott Valverde, Chief of the Office of Student Assistance and Relief. For members, non-new members, you may recall last meeting in May, I had just come on board. In fact, I think it was my 7th day on the job at the last meeting. So that fact combined with several new members, I'll just do a quick introduction of myself to refresh other members' memories about my background, and then I'll go into an update on our office. So similar to Dr. Marion, my entire professional career in post-secondary higher education in various capacities, private and public, community colleges, private post-secondary institutions, as well as 7 years in the prior iteration of the Bureau from 2000 to 2007 as an education specialist. And most recently, I was the statewide coordinator of the Disabled Students Program in the community college system, so I have a very deep and passionate background as it relates to student services, student success, student outcomes, both educational and personal and professional, vocational. So that is my background. So July 1, our office came into effect officially. As I said, I had just been hired at the last meeting. We were allocated 10 positions, and we have 8 of those positions filled to date, and with the 9th soon to be filled as well. We're very close on that. So basically at about between 80 and 90% staffed. And so we are fully functional and operational and have taken over the responsibility of reviewing and making recommendations on student tuition recovery fund claims and all that entails, as well as all outreach functions of the Bureau and pretty much any public-facing, front-facing student contact as well. So on outreach, we're talking about closed school outreach, events where we go out on site when a school is closing and meet with students individually about their options and rights and next steps, as well as proactive outreach as well. So we've really made a lot of partnerships and as you'll see when I talk about our report, have really gone out and done a lot of proactive outreach with a lot of different populations and communities for prospective students as well that are considering private post-secondary education as their next step. Let's see. So some of the things that we've accomplished in our first 7 months to stand the program up and get the program operating and functional. We worked with the previous bureau chief and the director to get approval for separate but related co-branding for OSAR, the Office of Student Assistance and Relief. That entailed the development of our own mission statement, our logo, our website, which is up and functioning, our Facebook page, Twitter page. We also did a press release on the launch of OSAR, which led to several media contacts that have increased the awareness of the office, which we continue to sort of work on to increase that. We've established personal, direct relationships with all of our statutory partners that are involved in outreach, as well as other partners that are not necessarily statutorily mandated. The mandated partners are the Student Aid Commission, the U.S. Department of Education, California Department of Veteran Affairs, the California Community College's Chancellor's Office, and the Consumer Financial Protection Bureau. Those are all called out in our statute. Personally met with representatives of all of those offices, as well as are on standing agenda items. We've met virtually. We contact all of them whenever a school closes, as an example, but are also partnering with them probably most closely with CalVet in terms of actual outreach content as well and events. We've developed policies and procedures for both the Strif claim processing and outreach procedures, both for closed school and proactive outreach. A lot of that included updating prior pre-OSAR procedures, but quite a bit of it were fundamentally changed and or created under my leadership. We've in earnest began processing and making recommendations on the Strif applications. The final approver of those claims, whether it be for a recommendation of approval, denial, or ineligible, still stands with the Deputy Bureau Chief, but all of the legwork in working with the student individually, up through and including the recommendation, is done by my staff. We also engaged in a targeted outreach campaign for former students of Corinthians colleges. We made contact with approximately 5,700 students that we had from various sources and rosters that had not otherwise filed a claim with the Bureau or otherwise made contact with the Bureau. We developed a survey as well, sent them information on Strif and about OSAR, and we were very happy with that. We got 84 additional Strif claims that were filed and are currently being worked that we strongly believe would not otherwise have been submitted if it weren't for that targeted outreach effort. We've met our only statutory requirement to date, which is to post our quarterly activity report with very specific data elements that are in our statute. I apologize, that was an example of one of those two was given as a handout. Hopefully you got that at the front desk. It wasn't included within the packet, but I'll speak to that briefly, and as well as the Strif Claim Fund report, which you traditionally get as well. OSAR second quarterly report, it looks like this. It was at the front desk.
Okay.
And I'll summarize as well, and if you have any questions on that, it's also posted on our website and the Bureau's website. And again, I apologize for that not getting into the packet. I would say the underpinning of all of those activities and accomplishments that I just detailed are really about me developing a culture, an office culture of customer service, student first, customer first, individualized case management approach with wraparound services, really working with that student individually in a way to ensure that whatever the issue is has been resolved with an actual OSAR staff working with that student individually, whether it be completing the Strif application, filing for a federal student loan discharge or a discharge through some other federal program, whether it's getting in contact with the right person if they have a complaint, facilitating transferring to another school if the school's closing. We try to do that as much as possible on an individual, like I said, case management type approach is really the culture that we've trying to instill. And I'm doing that in some very specific ways through staff training, through our principles and approach in hiring staff, in our duty statements, in our interview questions, etc., that we really want people who are passionate about, as I am, with working with students individually and helping them help themselves, whether it be, as I said, on the proactive side, making an informed choice, choosing the right program for them, understanding the financial burden and responsibility that they're taking on, in choosing post-secondary education, their earning potential in the future, all of those things. Or, like I said, on the other side, on the other type of outreach when there's a closed school, to ensure that they either transfer to another school if that's what they want to do, relief that they're entitled to per state and federal statute. So those things that I've been talking about are sort of quantified in the two handouts, one in the quarterly report. These are the statutory requirements that we're required to present data on quarterly, publicly, through posting on our website, which are outreach activities, number of students served, and then a summary of student services broke down by some specific criteria that are in the statute. Some of the things that I would highlight here just briefly, so I can open up to questions for you, are, I would say, the diversity of the types of events that we're doing in outreach. Is, I think, evident by just what we took on in this second quarter of existence as we were just getting staffed up and working in earnest. I think, I have a commitment to present to you outreach summaries in the future that are even more diverse. But you can see we've had presentations at conferences for veterans counselors. We've had college fairs. We've had closed school workshops. And probably the one that's been the most, what's the word I'm looking for? One of the newest things that we've done that the Bureau has not done in the past that I'm most proud of is our partnership with the CalVet CalTap program, if you're not familiar with that. It's a new, fairly new, went into existence a little bit before OSAR, gave funding to the state through the California Department of Veteran Affairs for transition assistance, and that's what CalTap stands for, California Transition Assistance Program. And as for exiting servicemen and servicewomen 6 months prior to their discharge date, CalVet is providing outreach in the area of educational opportunities with their GI Bill, entrepreneurship opportunities, employment opportunities, and housing. And they brought us in. We're doing a series of these events on bases up and down California. The one that's represented in this particular quarter was an event we did, that I did, at Camp Pendleton, and there are many more that are going to be being uploaded into the upcoming outreach event section of our website. It's very, very meaningful and powerful, and again, the example of that principle I was talking about, that one-on-one, where we come, all the partner agencies do an overview first about our services and our sector, the community colleges speak, CSU and UC, and then in the afternoon we meet with students individually timed appointments to talk about their specific scenario and the considerations that they are taking into account in choosing their next step, many of which are looking at private post-secondary sector as well. So that's been really good.
Right, so that is nothing to do with Strif. That is going to help counsel students
on the front end. Yeah, that's part of OSAR's charge as well. Was not only to do outreach for closed schools and Strif and financial relief at the federal level, but also to do outreach on the front end for prospective students as well, to help them make an informed choice when they're choosing private post-secondary institutions. And so that particular project is under that umbrella of OSAR's charge. The next thing I would highlight on the quarterly report are just the pure number of students served. Just within that quarter, we had 1,500 unique student contacts, and that's a combination of email, phone, in-person meetings. However, we can get in front of a student individually. We're tracking that through individual data logs. Does
this include the potential students that you're counseling?
It does, yes.
Well, it's not students, it's potential students.
Students and potential students, yes. Thank you for that point of clarification. And that number is actually, again, this is only counting the second quarter. So that number is actually closer to 2,000 to date for OSAR as well. And then the other thing I would draw attention to is we made a decision to, at least for now, separate the data for Strif from by claims that were received prior to OSAR coming into effect, that we then took over when OSAR came into effect with these new procedures and regs and staff, etc., as well, and then separately in the second chart on the bottom of page 2, Strif claims received by the Bureau under the OSAR model, if you will, post July 1. And so that's the way we'll be tracking the data until all of the pre-OSAR claims are all closed out. The rest of the data elements, again, are all coming straight from the statute. I want to make sure I leave time for any of you questions you have, so I'll move to the second handout, which is attachment 6D in the packet, which is sort of a slightly reconfigured version of the Strif data that the committee has traditionally been provided with in these meetings, separating claims by claims received during the fiscal year, claims closed during the fiscal year, currently active claims, and then claims that we're calling in the queue that have been received but have not yet been assigned to an analyst. So that's sort of the categories of the reporting elements on the first page. We've also added a category which is closed, unable to contact, which were claims, older claims that were received back as far as 2015 by the Bureau pre-OSAR. That we have been the Bureau staff had been unable to contact after various attempts with all the contact information that we've had that were historically held under a status that kept them under current claims. So we created this new category and moved all of those which we had a minimum, and there are very few that were at the minimum, but a minimum of 3 failed contacts, and then 30 days from the last contact, and that includes return receipt mail requests as well. Our theory behind why that number was so high is that, and I can do a deeper dive if necessary, but we believe that most of those are claims where they had their loans discharged at the federal level, so there was no Strif need, if you will. The current claims we've also sort of pulled out to a couple of different categories to give you a better idea of where they're actually at in our process. So 213 active waiting for student response means it's been assigned to an analyst, it's being worked. and they're actively working with the student, as I mentioned, in that sort of case management approach to determine exactly what they're eligible for, but a recommendation has not been made yet. Analyst first review complete, recommendation pending means that the analyst has completed the recommendation, provided it for approval for the manager and myself, and either it hasn't been approved at that level, my level, or at the deputy chief level, and or has been kicked back to the analyst for more information before we could approve comfortably. Payment requested from state controller's office means it's gone through all those steps, been approved by the Bureau, and just simply the check hasn't been cut yet. And then claims in the queue, again, are waiting for assignment. The other thing we did in the past, and I guess that's one of the questions I may have for you, is whether you still want this data. Pre-OSAR, the Bureau has always, not always, but since the ITT and Corinthians closures.
Just clarification really quick.
Yep.
So your pending claims,
yep.
That's if it turns out to be true, that's the most you'd have to pay at this point.
What number are you referring to?
I don't know. I'm going as fast as you're a fast talker.
Okay, I'm sorry.
I'm going
I'm
through.
sorry.
I don't even know where I'm at right now. But I guess you got to the pending piece.
Mm-hmm.
Pending mean the analysis has been done. Yes, we need to write a check. Or does pending mean worst case scenario? This is how much.
Right. Okay. So I think you're referring to the second chart on page 2 of the quarterly report. Pending claims end of reporting month. So, for example, for November 2017, it'd be 176 claims identified as pending. That footnote for number 5, which is the dollar amount, is the amount that the 2,024,916 is the number we're looking at. Okay, we're on the same place. That number represents what the student has identified based on their application. So it actually hasn't been worked yet. That number could go up or down depending on the analyst's review. Pending means that it hasn't been worked yet. It hasn't been, a recommendation has not been made. So that number could go up or down in terms of actually paid.
And historically, it's about 50 out of 360 you'll pay.
Mm-hmm.
So if it's gonna go either direction, if you had to bet $1, you'd probably say down.
Likely it would go down, but again, the individual claims themselves could vary significantly either up or down.
I get you, up or down. They don't know how to do the refund calcs and things like that. Okay,
you got it.
I'm on board.
Okay. So again, back to the second page of the Strif data. So this is something that was requested pre-OSAR to have specific claims for the ITT Tech and Corinthians colleges called out separately, if you will, from other claims being worked by the Bureau. So we can continue to provide that if the committee wishes to. One change that we made for this report compared to previous reports is we actually called out the Corinthians colleges separately and specifically, so Heal, Wildtech, and Everest. The difference between chart number 1 and chart number 2 on page 2 is the top chart is strictly this fiscal year, so 17-18. And then the bottom chart are for all claims received from ITT Tech and Corinthians historically. So from school closure all the way to the current date.
So it's basically 100% of your claims paid came from these schools.
Say that again, I'm sorry.
100?
No.
All right, so it does not total 362 because I'm looking at page
right, the
1.
The right chart, the 33,000, the 4,000, the 198, and 10 do not add up to the 362. So the all claims, again, 234 claims received in 17-18. 49 Strif claims have been paid out for a total of $362,000. Of that, 33,000 have been ITT Tech claims, 4,700 have been Healed claims, $198 Wildtech, Everest 10,000. Does that make sense?
It does.
And your so the 234 Strif claims received during that year do not necessarily coincide with the 49 that were paid, because that's just 49 that were paid in this fiscal year that could have come in prior. Okay.
Matter of fact, as of the time this data dump was done, there may have been one or two at the most in that 49 that were actually received in 17-18.
Okay.
The majority of those were carryover from pre-OSAR. So our work, our strategy was when I came on board at the staffing level we were at, as we ramped up, staff were exclusively working by oldest claim in-house first to sort of, get through all the ones that we absorbed pre-July 1. That there's been a slight modification to that as we become more closely to fully staffed, where in the few closures that we've had since OSAR has come on board, we're identifying one particular point person that for that particular outreach event, and they're getting all of those claims and are beginning to work those as well. So we're kind of coming at backlog, if you will, from both ends. And it's been a good strategy because we got one person who makes one particular contact and relationship with the students from a particular closure, and all that work is funneling through one person. Any other questions?
Claims are taking to resolve the Strif claims.
I'm sorry, I didn't hear the question.
Do you have somewhere in here how long these claims are taking to
Like
resolve?
an average time? I don't have that. That's something that we're actually working on internally as part of a business improvement process, if you will, and that's our first step, is to look at the average life cycle of a claim. So we're working on that. It's not part of the statutory requirement, so that's why it wasn't included in this particular data report, but we do intend to have that in the future.
I thought the numbers were going to be a lot higher. To me, these are pretty small numbers, and we look at the number of complaints still open versus this. And I know now we're working with, because we've got a head count of 10. It's just my observation. It's a lot of people to deal with small incidents at this point versus the number of complaints that are there. I don't know if it's a balancing thing, and I just across the country last year or in 2016, roughly 600 schools closed. Last year, 177 closed. This year, it's going to be a much smaller number still. So that pig has passed through the python. We're not going to see the big closure. I like that.
Can I just speak to that point?
Yes, please do.
So I just a couple of reminders are of the 8 positions which we currently have filled. Really, only 2 have a primary percentage of their duty statement is processing Strif claims in terms of the actual amount of pending Strif claims that we have. So we're focusing quite a bit on the outreach side as well in terms of developing opportunities for that proactive outreach that I talked about, facilitating those, doing closed school outreach as well. And doing closed school outreach in a different way than maybe has been done historically, where we're doing a lot of proactive work, working with the colleges as early as possible, working with the Bureau as schools sort of become in sort of a red flag status, getting rosters as soon as we possibly can, and then making individual calls to individual student names on those rosters to tell them about the outreach event, to spread the word, to start getting some basic questions answered so that the outreach event itself is more effective than maybe has happened in the past. And so, in addition to all the partnership
At a school
development,
closing or an imminent school closing, that makes a lot of sense.
Yeah.
The outreach you're doing for prospective students, I'm having more of a problem with that just because there are a lot of other people already doing that. You really should go to every single high school, but we already have high school counselors doing that and things like that. So we're dealing with the students affecting our sector. There's backlogs. So my 2 cents. My 2 cents.
To discuss later.
Yeah, absolutely. And real quick, let me jump in before Scott wraps up. One, we have to remember this office has only been open for 7 months. But I think often, or at least what I'm learning in the last 4 months that I've been here, a lot of people don't know about OSAR. So I think the outreach on the front end is to kind of say, hey, here we are if something's going on or you need some assistance. So I think that's why the outreach has been really heavy on the front side.
And I keep going, do it. But we're going to get to a point where if we're not seeing the numbers increase, it's because we're solving a problem that the problem wasn't as big as we thought it was.
Understood.
Because right now we've got, at the amount we spent the money last year, there's 97 years of Strif funding available. And even if you look at the pending worst case, we still have, 15 years worth. So
On that point, let me ask you a question. In your 7 months that you've been here, I think we all kind of went into 15, 16 thinking there are going to be so many claims that the Strif fund is going to be depleted. But what we're seeing is not even close. So what have you gleaned from your months in this job to give you an indication of why students either aren't making the claims, or if they are, they're not qualified or eligible?
I think in the 7 months that we've been here in existence, the schools that have closed, again, that's a very small sample size, and I could probably get you this data. I would say a very high percentage of the students that we interact with in those closed school outreach events where there is a Strif eligible case there to be had, an extremely high percentage of those are submitting claims. They just haven't worked their way through the process yet. So there just haven't been that many closures. The closures that have happened, I would say a high percentage of those who are entitled to Strif, who are not transferring to another school or whatever reason, are eligible. They are submitting claims. So that's what I would say about that. The larger landscape is another story. You know what I mean? As I mentioned, that one particular effort where we got access to this roster for the Corinthian students, did this targeted outreach. Boom, there's 84 claims that we would have, I really believe wouldn't otherwise have come in. So that's part of what, as I'm building staff and sort of thinking about the resources that are out there and the schools that have closed and where we're at with the balance versus how many claims have been filed versus what we believe was the final student count. We're going to go backwards as well. We're moving forward and going backwards at the same time to sort of mine for some of those answers to those questions. But I think that's definitely a piece of the puzzle. And then the other is just, the unknown of what is going to happen in the future. Like I said, without, obviously this is not the space to do that. I don't think we could even do it legally, but there are schools that we believe are on the path based on historical red flag indicators are very high risk for closure moving forward as well, which again would increase that Strif burden for so it's always going to be a fluid number. I don't think I've been here long enough to speak any more to sort of the context of where the sector is in terms of schools and the percentage of those schools that I would classify as those potential closure red flags. But we're definitely, can at least say that this office exists and is active on that sort of front end to sort of get that information as soon as possible and to get our arms around those numbers, to get those rosters as soon as possible, and to do that proactive outreach to make sure that potential Strif eligibility doesn't get lost that maybe would have otherwise been lost had we not been here.
Would you reach out to students before the school closed?
It generally doesn't happen. It generally does not happen when the school, prior to the doors closing, but there are situations where we are doing that, like for example, if a particular type of program is suspended or they no longer have the approval to offer that program, but their institution still has a license to operate, then yes, we'll get that roster for that particular program and reach out to those students and start talking about outreach. In terms of actually scheduling and doing an outreach event when the school is going to close but has not closed yet, the only example that I can think of offhand is our next outreach event, actually, where a school has reached out to us and said they're going to close on March, whatever the date is. Boom, we get that information, we get the roster, we contact the students.
They've announced the precipitous close. All right, that makes all the sense in the world. But most of the school closures, going back to the pig and the python thing, it's happened. We don't have another big, huge wave of that, in my humble opinion. I think we've got 15% of the people who do claims are actually, but follow through. Most of the school closures, the education department will forgive the loans. It's just, we are incredibly well funded, and this is something where the students absolutely fund this 100% up front. It's non-refundable, that whole thing. So hopefully we're not thinking about increasing the balance. Another thing, if an unapproved, this is a different question, if an unapproved school closes and students are left holding the bag, they never paid into Strif. Do they qualify for Strif?
They were never approved?
An unapproved, you've got a school operating without bureau approval. Odds are they never sent in a Strif payment.
Right.
Are those students protected at all?
No. They were never approved by the Bureau. Not
through Strif.
Not through
But
Strif, yeah.
but to your point, there one of the things that the Bureau does is if they cite a school for operating without authorization, one of the things that they do is as part of their citation with the school is order that the school refund the students.
Right.
So obviously that assumes they have money to do that.
Yeah.
But
let me tell you what happens.
yeah, we know what happens. But
there's no money to do
that's
that. But that's where the
method.
risk is, and that's where the priority should be on the unapproved schools.
Yeah, and the other thing that's interesting about this, and Scott, I'd be interested to see what you think, in the next meeting, is I think there was this thinking going into putting the Strif fund together and putting the cap on it where they did that every student that made a claim would be making a claim for their entire tuition. And so what we are finding is that what is left after the student gets their loans refunded is, a couple grand. So one thing that would be interesting to have for next time is what is the average amount that a student actually gets in a Strif claim? Because I do think big picture, not for this committee, but from a legislative perspective, is we created this Strif fund with this very high expectation for what the claim amount would be, and now that we have 7 years worth of data, going back to when the Bureau reemerged, and with the OSAR office having very much more outreach and much more focus on this, to see when do we have another discussion about how much this fund needs to be? Because even if we had, we have 2 closures in the past 3 years that were huge closures, and the total impact on the fund is, $1 million on a $27 million fund. Is it really realistic that we need to maintain the fund at that level?
Yeah, that won't be the final amount, but I hear you because many of those are still in the process. But so I've got average time for the claim processing and average amount of a claim dollar amount. I'll have those for the next time as well. And just one other comment in response to one of David's comments about such a high percentage of them end up having their loans discharged by the federal government anyway. That's an active part of what OSAR is delivering as well, is that information to students and the process. We're working very closely. In fact, Dr. Marion and I just met with the US DOE representatives and Lisa last week and talked about how we can do the best job possible communicating to students about the closed school discharge process, the borrower's defense to repayment process, if there's any sort of a fraud involved and they weren't otherwise eligible for discharges. So that we're sort of a conduit of information as it relates to that as well, that students may not otherwise know about. We're experiencing that in that sort of case management approach.
That's great work. And share that with all the schools, because every single financial aid department should, I know we've been doing the same thing, but our schools are meeting with more people than you guys are meeting with, when we could also help. So
I appreciate that.
Yeah. Great report. Thank you.
Thank you.
Sure.
Yeah, mine is quick. Less of a question, more of a comment that I think I've made before. Just in looking at your student outreach activities, which I actually think are great. I think it's too early to determine whether or not there's a problem or not a problem. So I agree that even just getting the fact that you guys are out is important. I see that you had an event with the Latino College Expo, and I think I've asked in the past, are there other racial groups that you guys are specifically focusing on and targeting and having specific outreach for?
We had staff participate in the Black College Expo as well. There's 2 separate dates and locations for that, and we'll be at both as well. So that's another one we're doing. I mean, in terms of special pops, demographic populations, it's the Latino Expo, the Black College Expo, veterans. That's part of what I've got my staff sort of brainstorming on now too. Keep in mind, we've just kind of got to the point where we're 80% staffed and figuring out duty statements and where the needs lie and where the gaps lie. And that's one of the things I've really empowered them with and charged them with, is to look for opportunities that the Bureau has not otherwise participated in the past, and let's explore those opportunities as well. So I'm a sponge. I'm open to anything that's out there. Like I said, I've got staff looking for opportunities like that. I do have some contacts through the community my background in community colleges, where they've got a lot of programs that they set up based around special populations as well that I'm looking forward to tapping into. But more to come is probably my best answer to that.
Great, thank you.
It's on our radar.
Thank you.
First of all, are you going to be developing materials to hand out to students?
We do. That's a good question. We already have a sort of a mini flyer. I can provide that next time as well.
Okay, because before you started, I had asked that the Bureau had some handout materials before, which I found not only inadequate but detrimental in that they painted an absolutely rosy picture of private post-secondary education.
Yep.
And I think one needs to present a fair picture of what the costs are, how they compare with community colleges, what the problems have been in this industry over the past number of years. And by the way, to your point about with the pig's gone through the snake, the pig went through the snake back in the early 90s, and then we had a period when federal regulation loosened up, and we got a new pig that just went through the python, and now we're going to have another period of federal regulations loosening up, so we may have another pig coming down the road, although it may take a few years, to your point, it may be further on. But this industry has been cyclical that way. When the screws tighten, then, schools close, things improve, and then screws loosen, and, it goes through that cycle. So we may see some increased complaints, but I would very much like to see the materials. And I think the advisory committee should have an input on that. We want to make sure that they are fair, that they give students a whole picture, that they explain the difference between community college and nonprofit and for-profit, and how you figure out which one it is, where they can get information on the web, a lot of things. The second thing is, I noticed, and I'm assuming with the Bureau doing a new website, that will be dealt with, but right now I go to the homepage for the Bureau and I see nothing about student assistance. So there's no, under complaints, there's nothing about student assistance. I can search it by putting in OSAR, but that's not how students are going to find it. So that needs to be really beefed up as to, there is help here, students. And I assume you're
absolutely. So it's right on the main site. And I'm assuming people are hungry because we keep on talking about pigs and python.
The other question I have is, presumably the way Strif was being handled before, if students had filed for discharge of their student loan, I think those applications for Strif were just being held. Is that still how they're being handled?
They are being held.
Well, and let's say that somebody files for discharge with the feds and they also file a Strif claim. What happens?
So the referral for the discharge would be made to the US DOE. Any amount above that would be covered by Strif, we would move forward on and process and get that paid, and then we hold on to the claim. So if for whatever reason the loan was not discharged, then that would go right back into the queue again to be worked.
Okay, because I don't see a category for that, and I don't know where those are in your...
We can call those out specifically.
Okay, that would be great. And I am sort of concerned too about what I view as a small number of applications for Strif, given the thousands and thousands of students who would have a statutory right based on school closure.
Yeah.
I understand you're saying that these unable to contact were pretty much old ones, and
Correct.
You think they got their loans discharged, but is there anything that OSAR is doing? Let's say that you're not able to contact a student and you don't know whether you have a good address, or maybe you don't have a good address. What additional steps are you taking to try to locate a new contact? Because I know with a student population, they're very mobile.
Yeah, it's a challenge. I mean, we've tried everything we could at this point. We've gone through every piece of contact information that we've had. If there are other outside rosters or got rosters from the school and it's from another source, compared, make sure that it's the same address.
How about
some of them we get email kickbacks where then it redirects to another email and we send to those email. Return receipt mail. In the newer ones, a lot of times it's communication through the student of a particular school as a community in of itself, either through social media or word of mouth or whatever. That word sort of spreads that way, even if they are in that sort of mobile mode that you mentioned. But the older ones, it's challenging for sure. We're just trying to do everything we can with the contact information.
I might suggest, when I worked as an investigator, and we're trying to locate bad guys or witnesses. There are many resources out there, even more with the internet, whether you might want to consider getting a subscription to a white pages or yellow pages, person finder on the web, things like that, where you can locate someone pretty easily nowadays by name and former address that might help you find a new contact. Because I think outreach is extremely important, and that population is very mobile, and you're likely to lose people if you're not going beyond just trying their old contact numbers.
The other thing I mentioned about that particular category as well, that we, as opposed to either denying, putting them in, closing them under the other existing categories, by putting them in this specific category, and then if the student does reach back out to us, even though it's been a minimum of 3 failed contacts in the 30 days, we don't put them back into the back of the queue. If they do, that we can open the claim up immediately and begin working it. As opposed to whether it was denied, we'd have to go through the appeal.
Are you able to get any contact information from the Department of Education, or is that all privacy governed?
But through FOIA, we have been able to as well. So, yep.
Of course, as you mentioned, Strif covers things that loan discharge doesn't. So you would have, even if they got a loan discharge, you would still have.
Exactly. Like, we'll call those out separately for you next time as well.
And one thing I wondered, as far as your outreach, I think I saw somewhere that there's thousands and thousands of requests for transcripts, where transcripts are being sent to students who attended a school that closed. And I'm wondering if you had considered sending out with those transcripts information about how to file a Strif and who's eligible and so on. Because it may turn out that they aren't able to transfer, even though they think they might be able to, and they might, so that would be another opportunity to have outreach.
Got it. You're talking about when we're responding to a transcript request.
Someone requests a transcript from you, and it seems to be that you have many, many more of those requests for transcripts than you have Strif claims, and yet those people may find their credits aren't going to transfer.
Yeah.
So if you had that form in there, that might be a way to have better outreach to them. I have a question also on your number of students served in your chart. Whether it's statutorily required or not, I think it would be helpful for us to know what was the service and what were the results. So maybe all you did is say, contact this agency, and that's it. And somebody else,
in the footnote,
you may have helped them fill out the form and whatever. And then you may find out, yes, they did get this, or no, they didn't.
Got it.
And then the other question I have is, you mentioned that your staff is reviewing and making recommendations on Strif. Who makes the decisions on Strif?
Ultimately, the final signatory authority is the Deputy Bureau Chief, but that's done after the Strif analyst making the recommendation, that's then reviewed by the manager and then reviewed by me. So that's a secondary and tertiary review of the analyst calculation of the Strif amount and all the supporting documents. And then ultimately, that's given to the Bureau Chief to make the final approval.
It sounds to me different than what I understood this office would be doing as far as Strif. Because I assuming if you're making recommendations, you're sometimes recommending the Strif claim not be paid, correct?
We do have some cases where the recommendation is for denial or that they were ineligible.
Yeah, see, to me, that's really processing the claim rather than assisting the student to make the claim. And I understood this position as not actually, in essence, you are making the decision, although it could be reversed at a higher level. And I don't understand that that's what this position was for, that it was to help assist students to do the best they could in filling out their claim for Strif and not making a determination of whether I think this is a good claim or not a good claim. Unless, let's say, the claim is denied, and then you might help them to say, well, here's the information that you didn't include, or whatever, or you might go to bat for them with the person making the decision, or tell them maybe you want to appeal this. But I don't see under the legislation, and I'll go back and look at that, but I don't see that as your role to be denying claims, because that puts you in kind of a conflict. You're supposed to be the advocate for the student.
That's why we ultimately don't do the denial. The staff does the review.
You do by making negative recommendations. You are recommending against the student. And maybe that's the proper decision, but it shouldn't be your function to be making those recommendations, in my view, and I think maybe we need to look at that. because I think that puts you in kind of a conflict. Then they come to you and say, I was denied, can you help me? And oh no, because I agree with the denial. So you're in a conflict situation there, which I think is a big problem.
Noted. We'll look into that if that's the case. Definitely.
Okay.
Thank you for that.
And I think those were the things that I had questions about. I really appreciate that you're on the job, and
Thank you.
I hope that we can get a lot more outreach because, there are thousands and thousands of students that are eligible, no question. And, I did have one other question, and that is, you have a notation here as ineligible, not a California resident, school not closed. That's on this sheet just down below the chart. That's based on the old statute, because the new statute says they can be eligible even if the school didn't close, if there was a program that was closed or if there were other complaints about the school. Are you still operating under the old statute because we don't have regulations?
We're not. We'll update this for you.
Okay. So you are looking
this
at
is
whether
just a
they
format from the previous version.
So you're looking at whether they're entitled under the new statute.
Correct.
Great.
You got it.
Okay.
Yeah, we have the new approved Strif application based on the last reg package and the existing law.
Okay, great. Thanks very much.
And all our procedures are based on that also. So I've got it.
Hang on.
Yep.
We got more now. That was very complete. And I'm not going to use my analogy again. I promise you. The material that you're going to put together to educate students, on the differences and things, you've got to look at outcomes, which graduation rate, placement rates.
Correct.
How do you you are comparing apples and oranges all day long with this. So I have no problem if you want to compare costs as long as you're also comparing outcomes.
I'm just suggesting that he bring the materials to us so that might be a topic of discussion at one of our next advisory committees so we can bring up all those topics.
I would love to do that. And the other thing, we meet with my institutions, we meet with an awful lot of students, and we try to see if they would qualify for Strif. And I can tell you, in years, we've never met one. It's just, a lot of students who have gone to a closed school, but we knew, they got their loans discharged. Because if we could get them their money, their Strif refund, most likely they're going to spend it in one of our institutions anyway. We're not seeing them. So I don't think there's these thousands and thousands and thousands of people that we'd see them every once in a while. And I'm just one school.
Right.
You found 49 last year where it worked. So
thank you.
Wanted to clarify, when you're able to get together the materials for us to see about what you provide to students and people, it would also be helpful to provide the packets for.
Yeah, we have that. Yep.
Okay.
Yep.
If you have it in any other languages, if you have it in Spanish or I don't know, Tagalog or whatever you have it, it'd be good to see that too.
Okay.
Anyone
Thank
else?
you for the feedback. I appreciate it very much.
Thank you for the thorough report.
Yep.
Before you leave, does anyone have any public comments relating to OSAR, the Strif stuff? And he's back.
I'm hungry. I'll keep it quick. Robert Johnson Caps. Scott, in the new statute, for the first time after repeated attempts, there were statute included that includes reimbursement to consumer attorneys for assisting with claims. I believe that's $500.
Up to $500.
Yes.
Yeah.
Does that go to the student?
We haven't had any that have been approved yet.
Okay.
So
there was a question on whether or not that went to the actual attorney or if that went to the student and what conditions that they would be paid under that. Are you developing criteria for that?
Lisa, did you have
Hi, Elizabeth Reddy, Deputy Bureau Chief. The statute states, or the regulations state, that the student is to provide a receipt that they've paid for the attorney fees, and then they would be reimbursed for them.
Yeah. The receipt part is what we added to the procedures as well.
Can I just well, I don't know, maybe, not, maybe you haven't, because if the student went to a legal aid group, they went to legal aid group because they couldn't afford to pay an attorney and they qualified for legal aid, so they're unlikely to have a receipt, is my guess. I don't know.
The point being basically that if that does start to occur, it would be helpful to see that information as that occurs. Thank you.
Absolutely.
That's all I
I'll add
got.
it to my list.
Anyone else for public comment? Okay, well, it is 12:37. Should we break for lunch? Actually, not too much. Mina, you have the status updates for the regulations, right? Or Michael? And that's not discussion, that's just the status updates, right? And then after that, we have to discuss one 2-sentence regulatory proposal and then a sort of open discussion about income share agreements. So I'm guessing maybe an hour. So I'm open to if people want to just take a bio break and then power through and then be done, or would we rather take lunch and come back? Thoughts from the panel?
I'll be here all day.
You're like, I'm not even getting up from this chair.
I recognize some people out audience. I think some of them want to say you're up. Are you on the agenda again? Yeah. I don't know how long they want to wait. They've been.
It's still so early.
Does anybody mind if we just take a short break now?
Yeah, I was going to say we can take like a shorter than bio break, but not full lunch.
A longer than bio break, but not full lunch.
Yes,
Gotcha.
yes. I obviously need the.
I knew what you meant.
break. Yeah.
1 o'clock. That's 20 minutes.
Yeah, why don't we just take 20 minutes and then we can come back and power through. Okay, sounds good. Go team. Everybody is back. Great. Okay, so moving on to the next item on the agenda is the status updates relating to looks like 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 regulatory packages that are in process. And it looks like Kent's going to give us the presentation. Welcome.
So I'll do a portion of it. And it
Michael will
actually
start.
should be really quick. A lot of the stuff has already came before you. So just an update on the Student Tuition Recovery Fund. That has been in effect as of August 10th, 2007. So that one is already in play. We didn't have a meeting, or the meeting was canceled when we would have gave that last update. And also the next one in the compliance inspection and complaint prioritization, that one is also approved and was improved in April and became effective July 1st, 2017. Moving on to item C, registration for out-of-state private post-secondary education institutions. That packet is actually in process right now for readoption. It is actually with agency, and we're hoping to get that ran through OAL very soon. Going on to D, English language programs. That was submitted to the department, DCA, and so that's currently standing right now in regards to the process. And then the last one, which was E, verification for exempt status, that's also with review right now with DCA as well.
I'm sorry. When you say it's with the department, that means the Bureau's drafted it, sent it to the department, and then it will be published for comment after that.
Correct. And I know I ran through those pretty fast because that's how I do things. Any question on those? And Kent is here to help address them. If there's not, we can move forward. Public comment.
Turn my mic on. Public comment. Come on up.
Yep.
Raymond Trivas from San Diego University for Integrative Studies, and my colleague Richard Miller, who's our General Counsel and Regulatory and Compliance Officer. We've testified about this a couple of times before at these advisory committee meetings, and our position is still essentially the same as it's been, that we're opposed to this proposal, and we recommend that the advisory board also oppose the proposal. And we're distributing copies of the materials. I'm not going to read everything that's in the packet, but I'll hit some of the high points and hope that you will take the time to read that later. But if you go on the Bureau website, you'll see that there's a statement of there's a mission statement, a vision statement, and values. And our sense is that this proposed exemption violates all three. The first talks about mission of protecting students and consumers. This would exempt a significant number of institutions from Bureau oversight, and therefore doesn't fulfill that role of protecting students and consumers. I'll say more about that in a moment. Second thing is vision to be the national leader in regulatory. I think backing off of a significant chunk of your regulatory responsibilities that you have now is not a way to be a national leader. And then third, the value statement talks about, among other things, accountability and consumer protection. And again, our position is that it doesn't honor those values, especially those first two on accountability and consumer protection. So if these institutions are exempt from BPPE regulation, then where is the recourse for consumer protection? Substantive recourse. Obviously, the courts are available, but typically these are students from outside the U.S. They may not have the standing or the inclination to try to deal with a foreign legal system here. And so in practice, they may not have access to that option. Another issue is that many of these institutions use foreign agents, which is allowed by BPPE only if they're employees of the institution. But many of them either do or would like to use agents who are not employees of the institution. And the last few pages of the packet is an example of one of those kind of agreements. It talks about a client agreement. The client means a foreign agent for a school. And this is an actual document that we came upon. We've redacted the particular names that are involved, but otherwise it's all there. And I've excerpted in the initial comments here a couple of the key points. It talks about collecting fees, which is basically the agent, the foreign agent, collects the fees from the student, forwards it to the school. And the next section on refunds, the section in bold, refunds will only be made using the same payment method originally used to pay the school and only to the party who sent the payment. So in other words, the refunds, if there are any warranted, go back to the agent, and the institution has no control over how that agent may disperse those funds or may not. Later in the document, there's two sections on liability and indemnity. And again, the highlights make it clear that the school disclaims any kind of liability for what, financial or otherwise, for what might happen. And the client, the agent, shall relieve and indemnify the school against any liability. So they're really covering their bases in that way, which we think is contradictory to the mission of the Bureau for Consumer Protection. Then I make reference to our statement that we filed back in May, which is attached, which has an analysis of a series of language schools which are members of a coalition which testified to the contrary at those previous meetings. And the comment that was essentially made was that these are short-term cultural tourism programs. But looking at the websites of these institutions, and these are mostly the coalition members, and we've added one or two others that we're familiar with, it makes it clear that what they're offering is not just cultural tourism. It's clearly academic programs designed to prepare people for university admission or for business use of English, which is entirely appropriate. Also, essentially all of these, I think all of those institutions are accredited either by ASSET or CEA, and in order to receive accreditation, they have to be explicitly academic programs, and the accreditation criteria are quite rigorous in terms of curriculum, quality of students, quality of faculty, various processes and procedures. So on the accreditation side, they're clearly saying, yes, we are academic programs and fulfilling all the expectations of an accredited academic program. But now on the regulatory side, they're making a point that, well, no, we're not really academic programs. We should be exempt otherwise. There's a lot here to read. I won't read it all, but I would like to make two additional points based on our discussion this morning about the finances for the Bureau and revenues. Obviously, if you are exempting a significant category of institutions, that will certainly have a negative impact on revenues to the Bureau. Reduces workload for the Bureau correspondingly, of course, but nevertheless, revenue goes down. And then in the minutes from the May 17th meeting, there was a discussion on this item, and I recall that the minutes made the point, I didn't copy those in here, but you have them in your packet, that before the Bureau began regulating the English language programs, there was a significant problem of fraud in some of those schools, and that issue declined significantly once they were regulated. So for all the reasons that we've said before, that we've said here again, and those last couple of comments, our position is that we as an institution are opposed to this proposed exemption, and we would urge the members of the advisory committee to register their opposition as well. Anybody has questions for me or Richard? Do you have any additional?
I wanted to mention hand in glove with the comments already made. I checked with Scott, who also verified that students from an exempt school are not eligible for Strif. Schools aren't paying in, and students can't get the money. They can't apply. They're out of that picture. So the very foundation of consumer protection and of this Bureau, looking out for the consumers, you chop them out. They spend their money. They're here. They're in California. They're going to school, and they can't touch that because the school is exempt. The school is not paying in for your regulatory process for those 22 positions. And the students are not being protected by the school by kicking in, or at least being under the regulatory umbrella to be liable to kick in for any tuition refund. As mentioned by Dr. Travis, they have to go back to the agent in the country or go to the court system, and going to the court system, usually they're going to be out of the country before they can prosecute anything in the civil courts. So it just seems like a total non sequitur to say we're here to protect, we're here to follow the mission statements. I'll only sing the song one more time. But the very core of what you're here for seems like a chunk of the vulnerable people, students, are going to be left to the predatory or potential predatory abilities of those exempt schools. That's what you're here for.
I have a question for the director on the ESL regulation. That came before us just for discussion purposes a couple of times, and I think some others had made fairly extensive comments about changes that we thought were needed. And in the past, when we did that, usually the Bureau would bring a revised version back to us before it submitted it for approval for publication, but we haven't seen any revised version. Were there substantial revisions made? And if not, that's an issue, I think.
I will let Kent speak to that one, and maybe Lisa.
There were some revisions made. You're correct in that it has been before the committee multiple times. 4 off the top of my head that I can count, dating back to before I started with the Bureau in 2014. So it's been a long-standing issue. It's been talked about a great deal. So the language was worked over and discussed, and all input was considered. There were some changes made based upon the input along the way. And the version that is moving forward right now, which is at the department level for approval, it has to go internally through the department and agency, and then we can notice it. So then it will be noticed at that point in time, where there will be the opportunity for more comments, obviously.
I think when it gets there, it's
on Strif, you have to be a California resident to receive Strif, correct? So these students would not qualify to receive Strif unless they're a California resident. Do we have the distinction that if these schools are enrolling California residents, there's certain rules that apply, versus if it's just students coming over here on student visas?
That was one of the issues that was raised in our prior discussions as a concern, because my recollection is that those proposing this were proposing a very narrow exception. But the initial draft that we saw 2 or 3 times without change was much broader exception than what they had requested. And I even believe that in the last time when I think I had noted that and we talked about how it needed to be restricted more, the proposers said they were okay with the proposed narrowing that I and I think others had suggested. So it's not clear. I don't know what's in the current draft, but the prior draft did not make that distinction. I think that was one of the issues that we discussed.
If I, again, trying to remember back to May, practically impossible. So there was the issue, to your point, David, that there was in some cases there was a mix of programs, and just like every other institution under Strif, we don't exempt programs, we exempt schools. So if you are offering any kind of program that would move you out of exemption, you're not exempted, and that means all your programs are covered. And secondarily, as far as my understanding, Lisa or Ken or whoever, if you are a foreign student who's coming here to an ESL school, you are not a California resident or therefore not eligible for Strif anyway, right? Is that correct?
Actually, the regulations 76020 states either a California resident or a student in a residency program. So if they're in California taking classes in a California school, then they're still covered under Strif.
Okay. Right, so not an exempt school would have to be, right, gotcha, okay. Okay. So I think that your comments are taken under advisement, and I think we'll have another opportunity to discuss the next version, right?
Well, you can put it on a future agenda item for more discussion. There's also, after it gets noticed, there's a 45-day comment period for
Okay, that's what
interested
I was
parties.
thinking of, right.
There's a hearing actually that will be noticed, and a comment period. So all interested parties could review the proposed language and provide very specific feedback to the Bureau.
Okay.
And you might notice that in the minutes that you approved earlier today from the May meeting, there is some discussion about that, including a number of the points that Margaret just referenced.
Also, of course, would be the use of the agents, which again, if you have exempt and not exempt, you're going to have a conflict there that may or may not have been previously addressed. But since you're an advisory board, before it gets to the notice period and the public comment, part of, I would think, your function might be to give the agency or the Bureau some guidance along that same line, so that you don't say, well, we'll wait until it gets to public comment when there's going to be numerous issues that I kind of thought maybe you folks would be giving some advice.
How enrollment processes work in other countries, I don't think is on our preview. I mean, agents, that's how it's done in other countries. Whether you're in Saudi Arabia, Korea, Brazil, agents are used, and the accrediting bodies have different rules. And I glance at your refund policy. I'm not sure that was an asset accredited institution, but I'm not even sure that violates the asset refund policy on ESL schools. I spend most of my time on the U.S. schools. I know it's an unfair or an imbalanced playing field because you're offering degrees, but a lot of these students, I mean, a lot of the good schools, they're good schools. Students come in, they spend their 3 months in San Francisco before they go to Chicago and then New York and then wherever else they might go. It is how it works. Sometimes they'll stay in San Francisco for 1.5 years, but otherwise they're bouncing around the country.
But when they're in California in a California approved school, if California BPPE says no agents, then it's either agents or no agents, exempt or not exempt. If you're exempt and you can have an agent and you're not exempt and you can't, somewhere there needs to be a bright line. And it seems to be missing, and it seems to be left in an ambiguous...
I think we want students to come here on student visas to come to California. We like that idea. If you say no agents, they're not coming anymore.
Well, maybe they will or maybe they won't, but then the regulation, I would think, and I'm not trying to be argumentative, if it says no agents and you're saying, well, they won't come without agents, well, then maybe the law should be agents are permitted. But if the regulations and interpretation indicate no agents, and if staff is saying no agents, at least to some schools that are not non-exempt, is that right?
Not to non-exempt or exempt.
Anyway.
Are we saying no agents to you?
Yes.
Yeah.
Question
to
again?
your institution? Are we saying you cannot use an agent in whatever country you're recruiting students from?
That's our.
We don't use agents.
It's a violation of the statute. Yes, the language of the statute is that agents and recruiters, enrollment advisors, whatever, must be employees of the school. So having contract agents is prohibited.
Right.
So these guys, as an approved institution, are not allowed to use agents that are not their employees.
And we
have
know
something
that there are
around
agents.
it that allows them to use an agent outside of the United States. I mean, that's a simple.
Well, I mean,
fix.
honestly, that's a provision I've always struggled with as well, because it is, especially for ESL students who are non-Title IV eligible, under the federal rules, there is no limitation on using foreign agents for students who are non-Title IV eligible foreign students. But the way the rules are written here, there's no wiggle room. And I've actually had a couple of schools that are outside the country recruiting students and have had this come up. So I agree it's problematic.
If anybody wants to learn more, I mean, I'd encourage you to either get a hold of CEA or ASSET, those two accrediting bodies. They do this all day long, and I think you've got relationships with them.
That's part of our problem, is the multiple layers of jurisdictions. But this is not just an accrediting agency, this is doing business. And the other function of that doing business, more than an accrediting agency, I think, is you are the watchdog. You're here to protect residents or students who are here. And when they come here, a lot of them stay, they go on to universities, they become full-fledged California residents. But our protection shouldn't stop at the whether you have a California driver's license. In this world, I think we look for equal protection for people who are inside our borders. And the state of California has been a leader in that juggernaut in protection of human beings inside California. So I don't think this agency wants to say, yes, except for you guys. Let's include them all if we're going to give some protection.
Thank you.
Thank you, gentlemen.
Thank you. I appreciate your help and advice before it gets too far downstream.
And do we have any idea when it will be scheduled for public comment or that particular section of the ESL section? Or what the timing is for the next phase or anything like that yet? Too early?
Currently, internal processes are taking a couple of months beforehand. We may very well meet again before it's noticed.
Okay. Thank you. Any other public comments about the regulatory package update? Seeing none. Next item on the agenda is discussion and consideration of draft regulatory language, which is agenda item 8, compliance with laws and procedures sub 71755.
Okay, this is mostly to address some ambiguities, mostly already existing in our regulation and partially from the statute. Breaking down, sub A is a direct addressing of section 94885, which is the minimum operating standards. It's sub A 9. And sub A states that the Bureau by regulation shall adopt, and then breaks down the factors of the different ones. And 1 through 8 were very clearly broken down and handled in our regulatory process. Number 9, which requires the institutions to maintain compliance with other ordinances and laws outside of our act, it's not clearly stated in our regulations at this time. And our interpretation, based upon the way the statute is written, that the Bureau shall by regulation, would mean that we would be required to create a regulation so that we could enforce this minimum operating requirement down the line outside of our act. It's becoming more and more poignant to be able to do this for compliance reasons, because each year we've seen some new compliance standards put upon post-secondary in general that includes the schools we oversee, but because it includes our schools, but it's a general post-secondary, it reaches outside of our act. And our act, without something like this, does not necessarily allow us any enforcement except to say, you probably should do that. This would give us regulatory backing behind it. I can also state in a review of legislation that's already been introduced for this session, there are no less than 5 bills of the same type currently introduced for this year that will be adding requirements to post-secondary outside of our area of the Act. And so this would allow us to create notices to comply because they would be compliance issues to follow through.
Give an example of what you're thinking about.
Currently, past last year is a new thing for financial aid reporting. Must be on the websites. I can't remember all the specific details. I could actually give you the bill number, but not all the details. But it's located in the post-secondary section of the law of the Education Code 66 something, and not in our act. And our current interpretation is we don't have an ability to enforce outside of our act, but it's a compliance standard that all post-secondary schools, I think community colleges are encouraged but not required, but UCs, state schools, and both independent and private post-secondary are required to do this. We would have no authority to enforce that without this regulation tied to our minimum operating standard. Does that help?
Would a similar thing be if a fire extinguisher is not properly charged? Where do we draw a line that says what is the Bureau enforcing and not enforcing? It would, right? You give you the ability to enforce, hey, your fire extinguisher is expired.
The way the
elevator thing is not done, and we're not sure that the HD, the everything else. I mean,
you are correct in that, absolutely, and that is the way the statute is currently written. So that's what we have to follow form with.
I don't know what.
Yeah, this one creates some, because you gave a great example, which is that it's the financial aid cumulative borrowing letter that you're talking about, which came out last year and applies to everybody but the community colleges, but it's outside the code, and obviously that's something that would make sense for the Bureau to have jurisdiction over, because it is something that applies specifically to post-secondary education. But to David's point, at what point are you, literally on a campus busting a guy for selling pot? I mean, well, I guess you can't do that anymore. Selling something other than pot. I mean, is there a way to limit the scope on this so that it's specific to, rules governing the operation of a post-secondary educational institution, so it's not getting so broad that it gets out of control?
I would be happy to look into more narrow versions. I'm just following along with the statute, which does basically say all applicable laws and ordinances and laws, and it is very broad in that nature. Now, going through and looking at the expiration date on the fire extinguishers and things like that, question whether that would be the best use of our time while doing it. We are talking about financial aid, post-secondary, and the proper requirements of them in operating the institution.
Yeah, I think statutory, I don't think there's anything we can do about that. But I would just give an example, and I can't imagine that, as you say, it's not the kind of thing that you're going to be looking for stuff outside the Bureau's regular jurisdiction. But there was a school that had an elevator that had a hydraulic lift mechanism that when I was in the Attorney General's office, we prosecuted, and it was not working, and they didn't have a lot of money, and they didn't repair it, and so this hydraulic oil fluid was accumulating and creating an environmental hazard, which actually was something that was involved in our case because, no, we're not the Environmental Protection Agency, but it was endangering the students. So I can see rarely, but sometimes instances where, yes, a fire extinguisher not being there might be something that the Bureau would say, we just jump out at them, and they can't just say, I can't see that. But it's not the kind of thing that you would think I doubt has come up really, if ever, once maybe if ever, in the Bureau's operation. But it's a statute.
You got to really want to sock it to a school to grab some of the stuff, and so if that's the purpose for it, just to give you an unlimited ability to smack the snot out of a school, that's what it is. But we finally, the Bureau has really come a long way in the amount of training and everything else that they've got. To think that you can dive into financial aid, that's a whole nother ball of wax that really don't want to get into. I mean, if it's by statute, you got to have it. You got to have it. I try to draw some fences around it just so that there's not ridiculous abuse.
It seems perfectly reasonable.
But I'll tell you this, I changed an exit sign once after a Bureau visit. It actually happened to me.
Thank you.
many years ago.
But I mean, it is. I definitely think this is something we need to fight. I understand the statutory requirement, but it is. I can give you an example. I have a school right now that I'm dealing in a case against the Bureau where one of the accusations was that students were being awarded federal student aid that the Bureau didn't think they were qualified for. That's the kind of thing where it should not be the Bureau's business to be establishing eligibility under the federal regulations. But you're saying that by statute, the Bureau basically has purview over every single thing a school is doing, regardless of, because they're all applicable? I mean, is that the level that we're talking about here?
That is one interpretation. And again, I agree this is all very reasonable, and I'm more than happy to go back with legal counsel and discuss the interpretation, including with Dr. Marion as chief, of exactly how extensively that's interpreted.
So just to read the actual statute, what we're looking at, the statute says, the Bureau shall adopt by regulation minimum operating standards for an institution that shall reasonably ensure that all of the following occur. And then number 9 is the institution is maintained and operated in compliance with this chapter and all other applicable ordinances and laws. So the regulation process could make that more specific. So I think what Kent was saying is there's opportunity to further define what that means. And then the Bureau also has, discretion to prosecutorial discretion to determine if there's an elevator that's posing risks to students, to make that an issue versus, looking at every school's fire extinguisher.
Right, but the example that Margaret gave, I think, is it crosses the line into the Bureau's purview because health and safety of the students is part of the Bureau's jurisdiction.
Public safety is listed as one of the factors that we use under 94941.
Exactly. So an elevator that might kill you, legitimately, the Bureau should be concerned about that. But I think you start getting into things that are on a much more minute level. If there's a way that we can have some further conversation about narrowing what is applicable under this regulation, I think that may be the way to.
And I also would go so far, and I can be corrected by those who would have more knowledge than I. What we really would be looking at here would be NTC's notice to complies, and not really getting into too much, except for an elevator that might kill somebody. But, a notice to comply. Please fix that and don't kill any of your students.
I just like to mirror that comment and recommend that you take a look specifically at the definition of applicable, or maybe qualify that in some way. Yeah.
Narrowing it. Anything else, Ken? from you, but I'll do a public comment and so people can come up and ask you questions.
Well, as that's just really quickly on sub B, because that delves into operating in accordance to policies and procedures. There's an ambiguity in both our statute and current regulations. We require that schools have a great many policies and procedures for handling a wide variety of things. But what we have not been able to point at this point in time is that they follow their own policy and procedure. And we do have complaints and other issues along these lines that have come up along the way. And it's ambiguous, it's silent about this. And so sub B is following directly along that these required policies and procedures that are in the Act and the division must be followed, as well as actually having them on the books.
How would you envision handling exceptions to policy and procedure? So, for example, an institution has a policy, well-standing policy, and due to extenuating circumstances, they make an exceptional decision, for example, an ad hoc judgment.
Well, I mean, to an extent that be left up to the complaints department, and the Bureau does have, prosecutorial discretion, as Mina has pointed out, and if it seems what's being done is just and fair to the student, then,
Sometimes in the policy, you give yourself an exception clause.
Mm-hmm.
If you're not following policy, you can always change the policy.
Just to be
Sometimes
clear,
policies just get outdated.
well, just to be clear, this is for policies required by the statute or regulations.
Probably won't change too many of
And you wouldn't make ad hoc judgments outside of them either.
Oh, I don't. No need for an unannounced. Again.
Any other questions from the panel? Any public comment relating to 71755? Mr. Johnson.
Thank you. There's always an issue between being overly broad and too specific in regs. It's a tough thing to wrestle with. If you take a look at the regulations currently on file with the Bureau, there are a number of what I would call gotcha provisions at the end of many regulations. They're saying any other Bureau as the Bureau may determine, or any other policies as the Bureau may determine. So the Bureau, in its regulatory formats, has given itself, in a number of sections in the regs, kind of a catch-all phrase to scoop up a school that they don't like doing things certain ways. The problem with that is that when the Bureau takes action on a nebulous phrase like that, and I've seen those reports come out where they cite the reg as anything we say you think you should do, if it goes to an ALJ, the ALJ is going to reject that because it's overly broad, it doesn't work. I've seen that in a number of cases inside the Bureau and other state departments. ALJs, administrative law judges, any other judge wants the aggrieved party, the party that's being accused, to have some specific knowledge of what was essentially wrong in the first place. So government authority, government agencies are generally not allowed to just go in and say, well, in our opinion, you did something bad, but it's not really there, but we're going to get you for it. And I think the language here, to some degree, kind of borders on that. So to protect your own interests, at some point, a review of the existing regs in terms of whether or not there's overly broad language. And it's easy to write, as a reg writer myself in the old days, you get tired of writing the specifics now, so you kind of want to shorten it up, you paraphrase, you kind of generalize, and you stick it in the reg, and then later on you realize it could mean anything. So it's not helpful to you, it's not helpful to anybody else, you can't really take action on that. So I think it's important to look at the final versions of these regs here. The one thing, not that we've ever had a particularly triumphant, progress of regulation recommendations that were adopted by the Bureau. But the one thing that I think is important, that rather than do the read, go back, amend it, publish it again, and send it off to OAL without another discussion on that, often winds up confusing everybody. So to the extent possible, and I'm not sure, you have to have your regulatory hearings, but to explain where you want to go with your regs, the changes that you make, and the reasons you make that, and how that will be enforced, would be very, very helpful to everybody. What normally gets discussed is how it's going to be enforced and what we're going to use to do that. That's the part that never makes it. The statute makes it, the language makes it, the intent might be there, you can construe that, but the reality is you don't know how it's going to be used and where it's going to be used. And I think that's where, if you look at a lot of the disputes between the sector and the Bureau, a lot of that was in basically how was that going to be used. So tough job, never easy. One of those things where you have to wrestle with that all the time. But I think in cases where it's overly broad and you can snatch it, and by the way, the Bureau had a staffer whose first act whenever he came into a school was to do a fire extinguisher check. His second act was to make sure you had fireproof cabinets. And that was pretty much all he ever did, by the way. So I just want you to know that does happen. And I will say also that the provisions under the emergency regs to health and safety have been something that has been actually a very prominent part of the Bureau's behavior on occasion. They've shut down schools that were causing immediate harm or potential harm to students. So I think there's good experience with that as well. So I would just end it by saying that the more sunlight you put on language, the better result you get at the end. Thank you.
Robert. Any other public comments? Questions? Concerns? Thank you very much.
Thank you.
All right, and to our last substantive agenda item, which was at my request, income share agreements. I think the idea today is just to take a few minutes to kind of put out there, me personally as counsel to a number of schools, I'm starting to see more of these as an additional financing option, and I know the Bureau has had some concerns about income share agreements, and so I was actually going to make the suggestion, and I mentioned it to Michael earlier, that maybe what we can do is create a subcommittee that can do some work on this, and maybe come back with a more substantive material presentation about ISAs, so that we can have a discussion, more fulsome discussion as a group. But I wanted to just kind of put it out there and see if people have thoughts about it, or if the Bureau wants to provide some input on their concerns about them, so that we can kind of be looking at those things as potentially as a subcommittee. So for those who aren't familiar with income share agreements, I am seeing this more frequently personally with my clients that don't offer Title IV loans because they're non-accredited approved institutions. So they're trying to come up with other forms of financing for students to pay for school. A lot of students, they'll either pay cash or they'll have some other type of private loan or some other financing tool. And one of the things that a number of coding academies, and actually sort of more wide scale, I've got clients all over the country that are looking at these as another form of financing for schools. But essentially the way an ISA works is a student agrees up front that they're going to pay a percentage of their income for some period of time, 2 years, 3 years, whatever it is. And so depending on how much they make, that could be more or less than the total, very similar to an income-based repayment plan through the Department of Ed, where some people obviously will go through an income-based repayment, or the public service option, we were talking about that earlier, where the student may have been financing a $50,000 education, but through income-based repayment or public service, they end up only paying 20 of it, and the end, the other 30 grand gets written off by the Department of Ed. So there's a sort of the risk share between the student who says, I am willing to sign on to pay 10% of my income for 3 years or 20% or whatever it is, with the understanding that that may mean that I pay you very little because I may have a very badly low-paying job, or hey, if I get really lucky and I end up making, getting a great job with where I get paid more, then I will end up paying more. And students are aware of that up front. They know what they're kind of signing on for. The advantage to the student is, the length of repayment is really short. So usually it's 2 or 3 years and then they're done, as opposed to taking out a federal student loan or a private student loan where they're making a payment over the course of 10 years, 15, 20, in my case 30. And a lot of times the amount that they pay, obviously if you're paying on a 30-year consolidated loan like I was, what my original loan amount, what my ultimate payment is, the cost of financing that is substantially different. I finance $125,000, I end up paying $300 because I take 30 years to repay it. It's similar, but just on a sort of a condensed time schedule. So I understand the Bureau has concerns about how that works, and it would be helpful if someone here can kind of lay out what the concerns are. If you can't do it today, that's fine. We'll just, we can have that conversation, at another time. But I wanted to put this out there because for the past year, I've been getting questions. Schools that are applying for Bureau approval are getting feedback that they're not allowed to use this as a financing tool, or they're being told that it somehow doesn't comply with the tuition disclosure requirements. So I think there's some confusion about how ISAs work and what they are. So I kind of wanted to put that out there. And then, Michael, I don't know if you want to weigh in on how you think the Bureau can kind of.
Absolutely. So we've had a couple informal conversations in regards to ISAs, and I definitely would be up for having some information presented at the next meeting. I know that there's definitely some schools or some institutions that are interested in that process and trying to figure out where the Bureau plays part in that. And I think we're still trying to figure that out, to be quite honest. But I think it's definitely something that's on the rise, and we see more institutions talking about that. So definitely the Bureau is in support of having maybe a subcommittee or having more dialogue around this in preparation for the next meeting. Sure.
Kate, would you be able to, say, for our next meeting, bring, in addition to kind of giving a little, I appreciate the intro because I was not aware of what this was, but a little more detail, and then also bring sample agreements, so basically you can see what the blank agreement looks like, but then also some sense of, as you were pointing out, where the number of years is, where the percentage of income is, what the interest rates are, and what, if any, other laws or regulations they think they are subject to by doing that, such as, truth in lending or the Unruh Act in California, the installment plan. That would be very helpful. And then I would think from that maybe figure out a subcommittee to look at it in more detail and think about whether something needs to be done.
Yeah, that makes sense. I actually probably could have one of either a client that's looking at using them, or maybe even if we could get a representative from one of the companies that actually does the financing, they might be able to come in and so I'll work on that. Okay. Yeah, no, that's fine. That's fine.
Helpful to see from the Bureau's perspective what they think, which statutes and regulations they think would be implicated by these.
Absolutely. So I think that's a great idea. We were just agreeing on that. So having somebody that actually does the work come in and maybe give a presentation to the whole advisory committee on it, and then definitely from the board or from the Bureau's perspective, we can say, hey, these are some of the things that may be potentially some concerns, at least coming our direction.
And we can have a dialogue with somebody who's an expert. That would be
absolutely
great.
That'd be great.
Okay. Does anybody have any input on that particular item? Thoughts? Okay. All right. So then that leads us to future agenda items. I think we just came up with one. Any other future agenda items?
We mentioned one earlier, which is making available to us a random sampling of I think complaints, especially ones that are not resolved satisfactorily. So, because they're determined not to be within the jurisdiction, or they're not substantiated, or ones that are also in the categories, examples of ones I think that were in the fraud other, or
Right, like what makes up the categories.
right,
Yeah.
and so we can see how. And I think what we suggested was summarizing, choosing either all the complaints from a recent month or some way so that it's not, cherry picked in any way, but gives us an idea of a better sense of why is it that this complaint or these complaints are rejected, kind of thing. The other one is, and I've raised this before, but I think now would be a particularly good time to do it now that we're under new leadership and everything, to think about this is, I really appreciate I think there has been a tremendous amount of work done by the Bureau since it was set up and the staff in trying to do the job that's assigned to it. But I have this frustration that as far as I can tell, the Bureau is not the one that is getting to the bad apples first. It's the Attorney General, it's the Department of Education, it's the Consumer Financial Protection Bureau, after these problem schools have developed into gigantic problems. And I would like to have some discussion from the Bureau as to just not specifically on how you're handling X complaint or this or the other, but what it is there anything that can be done that we can help the Bureau do, that the Bureau can do, that would really get a handle on the problem schools before they become really big problems. And I think one thing we've looked at in the past is when you look at the complaints that do rise to that level, often what you see, the allegations include are misrepresentation of how likely people are to get a job after they complete, how likely they are to be able to transfer their credits, whether or not the program will qualify them for the license, how much they're likely to earn afterwards. But especially, I think job placement has been a big one when there have been representations of 99% or something ridiculous placement and so far off from reality. So I'd really just like some brainstorming, I guess, as to is there something we're not looking at? Is there some way to address this? And maybe at the next meeting, some suggestions from the Bureau about that.
Margaret, I would love that, actually. I think that is a great idea, and I think that's a good conversation to have. I know that, unfortunately, there definitely has been some involvement on the BPPE side, and I'm learning this myself. But unfortunately, we can't disclose some information when it comes to investigations, and I think that's one of the things that's definitely I noticed that the Bureau gets beat up on, is that we have involvement, but we just can't publicize the involvement, or we are asked specifically not to be able to share certain information so the process can play its course. But I'm definitely open to trying to figure out other ways that we can get involved and do some of this work. Absolutely.
And I think that's very true during the course of investigation. Once the investigation resulted in a settlement or a prosecution or something, then I think that the Bureau can tout a little bit what its role was. And as I mentioned, if you have the Attorney General bringing an unfair business practices or false advertising case, my recollection is that there is a provision in there for them to pay investigative fees to the agency. And it's discretionary, but that's another thing the Bureau could be looking at. But so yes, and I realize some of those won't come out for a long time, but to the extent that, or if we can just know, yes, we now have a liaison with the Attorney General's Consumer Law Section or whoever it is, the Cosmetology Bureau or these different agencies that you might be working with. And then the third thing is just a question, I guess, for next time. And we had trouble in the past having a quorum. We have more members now, so maybe it won't be an issue. But I think it could be resolved if the statute were amended by just adding the word voting before the word members. And I wanted to find out, and maybe you can let us know next time, if the Bureau has a plan to try to get that statute amended in a bill or something.
Right. So I know we have something like that in the works. I'll leave it at that.
Okay. If you can let us know next time, if there is something and what it is, so that those of us who feel strongly that would be a good thing can support it.
Absolutely. And hopefully everybody received my call for this meeting. All right.
And I think the only thing I would add, it's not a new agenda item. I would just ask for continued detail. A lot of the obstacles you guys are running into, we're hearing, are kind of the staffing shortages that you have. So just continuing to get, I think as you get more acclimated, some of the trends you're noticing, and some of the steps you're taking to try to fill some of those gaps, and just kind of keeping us abreast to that. Because it's something we definitely hear about every time, and I think with new leadership, just hearing maybe your fresh eyes, what you're thinking.
Absolutely, and I'll touch on that real quick. So I've been in the Bureau 3.5 months now, and one of the things that I've had multiple people call me just to have conversations in regards to what my plan is, and a lot of it is retention, recruiting, training, and retraining, to be quite honest. I think a lot of people don't realize how much you have to learn being a part of the Bureau, and so when somebody leaves, it's just such a wealth of knowledge. Obviously you guys have years and years of working with Joanne. Joanne was a wealth of knowledge, and so with her transition, that's a lot of information that was lost, even though she's been very responsive to questions that I've had. But I think for me, it's just being able to recruit, make sure we get quality talent, being able to keep that talent. I know we talked a little bit earlier about not being able to financially hold some of those people, but at the same time, really trying to find a way to support them and to support the growth of the Bureau. We have an outstanding team, and one of my fears, to be quite honest, is losing some of these quality people, because we have a lot of work that we're trying to do to knock out. But definitely recruitment, retention, retaining, retraining are going to be some of the big key things for me moving forward.
The only other item, and I thought Margaret would mention it, but I have it on my list, is Scott, you're still here, to have the OSAR materials for us to review at the next meeting, because I think for probably differing reasons, Margaret and I both want to see them. So that would be helpful.
We both want them to be the best they can be.
The best they can be, exactly. So one other item, and Michael has them in front of the dates for the meetings. I actually had them on my calendar already, so I'm not sure if they were online, and maybe that's how I got them. But the next meeting is currently scheduled for May 15th. One note, and Mina, maybe you can check on this. I think the meeting on November 6th is scheduled on Election Day, so we may need to move that to Wednesday. 'Cause it's always the first Tuesday, right? It'll be midterm, so it'll be a big election day on, I think it'll be the 6th. No, I'm sorry, I'm looking at November right now. May 15th is the next meeting. So the meetings, as of now, May 15th, August 15th, and November 6th. But we're looking at November 6th, then maybe we can see about availability on the 7th instead. That on the That'll be a big one too, so that's probably not a great day, I mean. Okay, so we'll relook at November 6th, but as of now, May 15th is the date to have on your calendars for our next meeting. Is there anything else, Mina, that we need to cover? Yes. I will ask the crowd. So aside from the items that we just talked about as future agenda items, is there anyone from the audience that has any other future agenda items that they would like to put on the record? Robert Johnson would like to be appointed to the committee.
Second the motion.
I just come up with the ideas. A couple things. One, basically kind of a reg review, whether or not the Bureau can streamline its regulations to become more efficient. I think that needs to be done in depth. I think a analysis of the sector in terms of its decline and growth, and also basically number of students. We haven't had any update from the Bureau in years on just state out data for students, for institutions. So, what are you regulating? You have no idea. So I think it's important to kind of measure that a little bit. So those are two, I think, pretty big bites of the apple. I think but I think it would be really helpful for both state policy purposes as well as just information.
Thank you, Robert. We'll get you a job yet. Anyone else? All right, I think that brings us to the end of our agenda. Do we, I was going to say, do we need to vote on, I think we'll have a unanimous vote to adjourn the meeting. So the meeting is adjourned. We'll see you on May 15th. Thanks everyone for coming. Welcome new members.